Chapter 1302. None of the customers realized that the slightly spicy soup pot was not made by Meg. Rena also smiled as she watched the customers leave with satisfied smiles on their faces. She had never experienced such bliss before. She was touched by what she had gained, and gained far more than what she had given. Well done. I believe you will soon be able to support the restaurant's designated hot pot area. Meg looked at Rena and gave her a thumbs up. Thank you. Rena bowed deeply to Meg. When she signed up, she thought she could only be an ordinary waitress. She did not expect Meg to let her into the kitchen and teach her how to make hot pot. She had never expected such trust and respect. I hope my employees can become better so that they can share more of my work. In fact, I am a selfish person, Meg said with a smile. Rena also smiled. Not every boss who squeezes their employees will want to make their employees better and get along with them like friends. By the way, I didn't give you any gift when you came in. You can open it when you get home. Meg took out a small gift box and handed it to Rena. For me. Rena was a little flattered and took the gift box. Irina, who was playing with Amy behind the counter, looked at them with concern. This is a custom in my hometown. The boss will give his employees a small gift on the first day of work, Meg said calmly. He already felt some kind of unusual gaze. Thank you. Rena accepted it with a smile. This was one of the few gifts she had received. Well, you have worked hard today. Go back and rest. Come to the restaurant at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. Don't come early. It is so cold. I want to stay in bed more. Okay, you should rest early too. Rena blushed and was a little embarrassed. I took off his apron and hung it on the side. Then, he left with Mia and the others who had already cleaned up the restaurant. What did you give little sister Rena? Irina asked with a smile as she looked at Meg, who had locked the door. I sent her an alarm clock. I'm afraid that she'll be late for work and affect the restaurant's normal business, Meg said frankly. Irina was slightly stunned. Then you're really a good boss. Yeah, it can't be helped. The blood of capitalists is originally black. Meg sighed. He also felt that it was a bit too much for him to give a clock to his employees. Rena walked quickly in the dark alley. The road was a little uneven, but fortunately there was some moonlight tonight, so she could vaguely see the situation on the road. Although the public security in Chaos City was very good, there were still some robberies and rapes in the slums in the north of the city. So, when night fell, there was no one in the alley, let alone a girl walking alone. Rena was holding a short dagger in her hand that was hidden in her big cotton-padded jacket. Last year, her boss asked her to work overtime, and she was dragged into an alley by a drunkard on her way home. She used all her strength to knock him out with a rock and escape. From then on, she would always hold a dagger in her hand whenever she walked at night. Meow! A stray cat darted across the roof at the side, and Rena immediately leaned against the wall. She also lifted her hand that was holding the knife from under her clothes. After a while, she heaved a sigh of relief after confirming that it was just a stray cat that was passing by, and there was no one else around. She continued to walk forward quickly. After passing through the long alley, there was a small bungalow in the distance. There was a dim light in the window. In the dark night, it was like a guiding light, and it made Rena's heart calm down. Why isn't Mother asleep again? Rena grumbled. She quickened her pace, and soon came to the small bungalow. She reached out and knocked gently on the door. Come in, child. The door was opened soon. Karen's, who was wearing a quilted jacket, quickly stepped aside. Mother, I told you to go to bed early. Don't wait for me. Rena walked in, closed the cold wind outside, and looked at her mother grumpily. I sleep during the day. How can I sleep at night? I didn't wait for you. Karen's waved her hand with a smile. She looked up and down at Rena and asked, Did you meet anyone strange on the way? No, I just met a stray cat. It gave me a fright. Rena shook her head. She walked into the house with Karen's. She knew that her mother couldn't sleep because she was worried about her. Alas, it's not good to be so late every day. It's too dangerous to walk at night. Can you talk to the boss? In the future, we will work during the day. It's okay to do more during the day and let you go home earlier at night. Karen's was a little worried. Last year, she was scared when she saw her child come back with a bloody head. It's okay. I have a knife with me now. No one can hurt me. Rena shook her head with a smile. The busiest time in a restaurant is at night. Today, the boss taught me how to make red soup hot pot. I made the mild, spicy hot pot that the guests ate. Everyone said it was delicious. Karen's looked at Raina's shining eyes. It seemed that she really liked this job. She couldn't help but sigh in her heart. If it weren't for her, her child wouldn't have to live in this slum and wouldn't have to worry about being followed at night. Raina helped Karen's to sit down on the bed. She held her hand and said, "Don't worry, Mother. The boss said that after I become a regular employee, you'll give me a raise. At that time, we can find a better doctor to treat you. When you get better, we will move out of here and move to the south of the city." Okay. Karen's nodded and lay on the bed. After chatting with her mother for a while about what happened in the restaurant, Raina returned to her room. She put the oil lamp beside the bed and took out the gift box that Meg had just handed to her from her pocket. The gift box was the size of a palm. It was painted with beautiful blue and purple flowers. There was also a dark blue rope tied into a bow. What a beautiful box. Raina's eyes lit up. She played with the box in her hand for a while before she realized that the gift was still inside. She carefully untied the rope and slowly opened the lid. A red metallic luster lit up Raina's eyes. This is a clock? Raina looked at the red alarm clock lying quietly in the box and suddenly opened her mouth wide. It had a red metallic shell, a transparent crystal lid, a dial with numbers, and 3 golden metal needles of different lengths. The longest one was still moving, making a very soft ticking sound. Why would the boss give me such an expensive gift? Raina held the clock in her hand as if she was holding a priceless treasure. She was afraid that she would drop it on the ground. The previous boss had a clock on his desk. It was said that he had spent 50,000 copper coins to buy it. Compared to the one in her hand, it was much more bulky and ugly. How much did this clock cost? Raina didn't dare to think about it. She immediately closed the lid and tied the rope again. She had to return it to the boss tomorrow morning. She couldn't accept such an expensive gift. After solemnly putting the clock on the bedside, Raina found that a note had fallen on the bed. She picked it up and looked at it. There was a beautiful handwriting on it. Raina, remember to set an alarm clock. Come to the restaurant at 6:00 sharp, Meg. Chapter 1303. After an hour of mental struggle, Raina finally decided to carefully take the alarm clock out of the box. Following the instruction manual, she set the alarm clock at 5:30 a.m. She then carefully placed the alarm clock at the head of the bed, extinguished the oil lamp, and lay back on the bed. Listening to the light ticking of the clock, Raina, who was tired from the day's work, quickly fell asleep. Ding-ling-ling. Early the next morning, Raina was woken up by a clear ringing sound. When she sat up in bed, she looked around in surprise. After a while, she realized that it was the alarm clock at the head of the bed. She picked it up and looked at it. Using the dim light from the window, she saw that the hand had just reached 5:30 a.m. Wow, it really did ring at 5:30 a.m. This alarm clock is amazing. Raina's eyes lit up. It was much better than the rooster next door. Their rooster would sometimes crow in the middle of the night, making people unable to tell when it was really daybreak. All right, I've used it all day. It's time to return it. Such a precious gift can't be casually accepted. Raina pressed the switch gently and turned off the alarm clock that was still ringing. She put it back into the box and then put it in her pocket solemnly before going out to wash up. When Raina arrived outside Amy's, it was 5 minutes to 6 a.m. Meg, who had already washed up and was downstairs, saw the figure outside the window and opened the door to let Raina in. "You're very punctual today," Meg said with a smile. "Yes, thank you for the alarm clock. It let me sleep well." Raina also smiled and nodded. She then took out the box from her pocket and handed it to Meg with both hands. I can't accept such a precious gift, but I have already accepted your kind intentions. Thank you very much," Raina said with a serious face. Meg fell into deep thought as he looked at the alarm clock. If this alarm clock was replaced with a spring, it could be sold for 50,000 copper coins in this world. With its beautiful appearance, it should be able to attract the attention and love of girls. However, he had spent 25 copper coins to buy this from the system. Because he was worried that Raina would feel pressured, he had specially chosen a simple and cheap design. He did not expect that this lass would give it back after using it for a day. I don't have the habit of taking back the gifts I've given out. Meg shook his head and looked at Raina with a smile. And I was going to inform you of another thing today. From tomorrow onwards, you will be fully responsible for making breakfast for the cleaners, providing the congee with pork and century egg for breakfast in the restaurant, and independently supporting the designated hot pot area of the restaurant. Therefore, this alarm clock is not only a gift, but also a guarantee that you can arrive at the restaurant at the correct time to serve the guests. Raina looked at Meg in shock. She almost could not believe what she had just heard. From tomorrow onwards, I plan to go out. As I don't know how many days I will be gone, closing the restaurant is not very friendly to the guests. Currently, the only dishes that can meet the standards of hospitality are your hot pot and Phyllis's roast beef kebabs. Therefore, the restaurant can only be handed over to you for the next few days, Meg explained with a smile. But I've just learned how to make the mildly spicy hot pot. You said that the congee with pork and century egg is still not good enough, Raina said worriedly. So, I hope that you can really master the congee with pork and century egg this morning. Otherwise, I can only remove it from the temporary menu. Raina looked at Meg. After hesitating for a while, she nodded. I will work hard. Okay, then let's start today. Meg nodded. He was very satisfied with Raina's attitude. The cleaner's breakfast was made by Raina under Mag's guidance. The cleaners, who had been eating porridge with egg for a month, praised Mag as usual after they finished their porridge. They didn't find anything different from before. Meg also had a bowl of congee himself. He gave Raina a thumbs up and said with a smile, "Very good. You will be able to master the subtle differences in the heat after cooking it a few more times." Okay, Raina nodded. She looked more confident. During breakfast, Meg announced to everyone that he would be going out the next day. The date of his return was not set yet. Raina and Phyllis would be in charge of the restaurant. They would use the temporary menu to let the restaurant continue operating. However, because there were too few dishes to choose from, the lunch hours were canceled. They would only provide congee with pork and century egg for breakfast, and hot pot and roast beef kebabs for dinner. Will the customers protest? Yabamiya asked worriedly. Especially the tofu pudding. I'm afraid those crazy women will tear down the restaurant, Barbara agreed. I think they will get used to it gradually. Meg was also not very sure. However, it was already a miracle that Raina could learn how to make hot pot in 2 to 3 days and let the designated hot pot area continue operating. He could not ask for more. It might be easier in the next few days. You can adjust your rest days according to the restaurant situation. I will leave it to you to adjust yourselves, Meg said to everyone. In that case, the ice cream shop can be open for a longer period of time every day, Yabamiya said thoughtfully. In the afternoon, Irina told Meg that the night elves had already arrived at Chaos City and had obtained permission to enter the city. They were already at the city Lord's Castle. You can go and meet up with the night elves first. I will make a trip to the city Lord's Castle and act according to the original plan, Meg told Irina, and arranged for Raina to practice on her own. He pushed his bicycle out and went straight to the city Lord's Castle. Mr. Mac, why are you here? Meg bumped into Michael, who was riding back, when he arrived at the city Lord's Castle. City Lord. Meg nodded slightly, and then smilingly said, I heard the new batch of elves came to Chaos City. I recruited a good elven employee through the City Lord's Castle's job fair previously, so I specially came over to take a look. The factory I invested in the north of the city is about to be completed, and it needs a batch of employees. Mr. Mac is quite well informed. I came back precisely because of this. Why don't we go and take a look together? Michael said to Meg with a smile, but he was criticizing him in his heart. You rascal, aren't you here to help your wife get people? Then, I'll have to trouble you, City Lord, Meg said with a smile. He parked his bicycle at the City Lord's Castle's entrance and followed Michael in. The whole recruitment process was very smooth, so smooth that Meg felt that the City Lord's Castle was going easy on him. They handed over all 1,125 night elves to him and even gave them temporary residence permits in Chaos City. They completely ignored the other bosses who came to recruit them, even if they offered better conditions. Our City Lord's Castle is only responsible for building the platform. We have to respect the elves' wishes. If you have any ideas, you can ask them personally if they are willing to accept your job." The City Lord's castle staff left right away after saying that. The bosses who were unwilling to give up went forward to offer better conditions, but they were all rejected by the elves they chose without any reason. Meg, who was being looked at with envy and jealousy, smiled at the elves and said, "Thank you very much for trusting me and choosing me. Let me bring you to your dormitory now." Book Guest Residence Reading Website. Chapter 1304. The Dwarven construction team had already completed the renovation of the 2 dormitory buildings and the construction of the main dormitory building in advance. Only the factory workshop was left with the finishing touches. And after the system received Meg's prompt, it also quickly renovated the dormitory. It installed wooden beds, showers, toilets, and a full set of bedding and daily necessities. Every floor was also connected to underground water that could be directly used for drinking. Among the 1,000-odd night elves, there were very few female elves. There were only 150 of them, so they were allocated to this smaller dormitory building. Meanwhile, the male elves stayed in the main dormitory building, and there was a spare dormitory building next door. Meg didn't have to do the task of allocating the dormitories and beds. Irina's adjutant had already arranged everything for them. Meg's job was mainly to gather everyone together and explain to them how to use the showers and toilets, as well as how to gently turn on the tap to get the water they needed for daily life and drinking. The tap that could be turned on gently and the toilet that could be flushed at any time brought great novelty to the elves. Meanwhile, the elves who had been fighting in the underground caverns for over a month and had been rushing south all the way couldn't wait to take a shower and wash off the filth on their bodies. Work clothes and a set of pajamas have been placed in your cabinets. At the same time, there are also 1,000 copper coins in cash. If you need to buy new clothes, you can go to Chaos City's market to buy them. Of course, the next payment will only be paid next month. How to use it is up to you. Meg stood on the high platform and smilingly said to everyone, "All right, everyone could go take a shower and then have a good sleep." All the elves thanked Meg and prepared to leave for their showers. Wait a minute. At this moment, Irina, who had been silent all this while, walked up to the high platform. All the elves stopped in their tracks immediately and looked at Irina respectfully and fervently. They could only come to Chaos City because of the princess. The night elves will be stationed here for a period of time. I'm very grateful to Mr. Meg for taking us in and giving us a job where we can earn income from our labor. I'm also grateful to Chaos City for accepting us into the city despite the pressure and giving us protection. Irina looked at all the elves and solemnly said, "So, I request all the night elves to abide by Chaos City's order and laws. Respect your work and live as normal as possible before you're summoned by the organization." "Yes," the elves replied in unison. Meg, who had already arrived below the stage, looked up at Irina. At this moment, she exuded the aura of a queen, making people want to look up and kneel down. "Let's disperse." Irina raised her hand, and the elves left the scene. After that, Irina briefed the head guard on the arrangements for the night elves for the next few days. The factory wasn't completed yet, so the elves could only wait for their mission. Fyrus would come and cook for the elves, and the big empty space behind the factory would be a good choice for the training ground. Anyway, there was no one nearby. Irina walked towards Meg after she was done with the briefing and casually said, "Let's go. It's all arranged." "You're quite suitable to be a queen," Meg said with a smile as he walked alongside Irina. "Yours?" Irina tilted her head slightly. "Mine and theirs." Meg nodded. "Then, I only want to be yours." Irina looked into the distance. "It's too tiring to be the queen of so many elves." Meg looked at Irina's side profile and suddenly felt sorry for this woman who only showed her strong side in front of others. He gently said, "Then just be my queen. When the war is over, I'll hand everything over to them." "Will the war really end?" Irina turned her head to look at Meg, as if she wanted to find the answer from his eyes. Meg didn't avoid her gaze and said seriously, "We can't end a war that hasn't started yet. But perhaps we can stop a war that's about to start, or end a war that has already started." Irina revealed a charming smile and continued walking forward. She asked, "Then, how do you plan to end the war with the demon race this time? A bowl of sweet and savory tofu pudding? I'll probably change it to crayfish this time," Meg said thoughtfully. "You can't be serious, right? Do I look like I'm joking?" On the way home, Meg specially went to Crassus and Julian to ask for a leave of absence for Amy. "Mr. Mac, that's not right. How can you delay your child's cultivation? Besides, who knows how many days it'll take? Can you bear the responsibility if your child's cultivation can't keep up?" Crassus looked at Meg with a stern expression. It was fine that Meg occasionally asked for leave, but this time, he didn't even mention the number of days. Wasn't he messing around? "Amy, it looks like I won't be able to take you with me this time." Meg looked at Amy with a regretful expression. Amy put her hands on her hips and looked at Crassus with a serious expression. "Master, I'm seriously warning you. If you don't let me take a leave of absence, I'll cultivate an extra hour of ice magic every day from now on." Crassus opened his mouth. Wasn't that too much? Amy's talent was already unrivaled among her peers. The only person Crassus wanted to beat now was Julian. If Amy cultivated an extra hour of ice magic every day, how could he compete with Julian? "Mr. Mac, you win." Crassus looked at Meg with some resentment. He looked at Amy, who had her hands on her hips and didn't have any intention of negotiating. He could only nod, but still reminded her, "Little Amy, even if you go out to play, remember to spend some time cultivating magic every day. Remember, it's fire magic." "Yes, I will." A smile appeared on AI Mi's face as she nodded her little head. When Meg brought Amy home, they passed by the magic potion shop and also went in to ask for a leave of absence. "Don't worry, Master Julian. I'll cultivate an extra hour of ice magic every day." Amy didn't forget to shout inside the magic potion shop. After closing for the night, Meg handed the restaurant keys to Raina. From tomorrow onwards, she would be in charge of Amy's. Meg hung the notice he had written during the day on the door, announcing that the restaurant would be in receivership mode. "We're in a hurry. Let's set off tonight," Meg said to Irina, who had already showered, put on her pajamas, and was about to go to bed with Amy in her arms. "Are we in such a hurry?" Irina looked at Meg in surprise, then looked at her own clothes and complained, "Why didn't you say so earlier? Just wear it like this. We're not going to take Z this time. We'll go straight to sleep, and we'll be there when we wake up," Meg said with a smile. "How are we going to get there if we don't take Z? You have a new lover?" "I've recently invented a mobile restaurant. We could try it out," Meg said with a smile. "Shameless." The system's resentful voice floated past. "A restaurant that can fly? Wow, I like it." Amy's eyes lit up. She jumped off the bed and threw herself into Meg's arms and asked excitedly, "Where is it? Father, where's the flying restaurant?" Chapter 1305. The water droplet-shaped mobile restaurant was suspended 3 meters above Amy's balcony. The dim light made the translucent shell look mysterious and beautiful. "Wow, it's so beautiful. It's just like a big water droplet." Amy looked up at the water droplet-shaped aircraft and then looked at Meg strangely. "Father, how do we get up there? Did you really make this?" Irina looked at the aircraft with surprise. Just making that huge water droplet hover in midair was already a very impressive feat. She knew very well that Meg was not a spatial magic caster. "Of course." Meg nodded with a smile and then snapped his fingers. One side of the water droplet-shaped aircraft opened up like a flower petal and slowly landed on the balcony. A staircase with light indicators extended all the way to the aircraft. "Father is so awesome." Amy's mouth was already wide open as she looked at Meg with admiration. "Let's go up and take a look." Meg accepted the little one's admiration and said with a smile. He was actually quite curious about what the interior of this mobile restaurant was like. After obtaining this restaurant, this was the first time he summoned it out to use. "Let's go." Amy was the first to jog up the stairs. "I want to take a look too." Irina followed closely behind Amy and quickened her pace. Looking at the two excited women, Meg had no choice but to follow behind them. Meow. Ugly Duckling looked at the three of them walking up the stairs and hesitated for a while before deciding to follow them quickly. After Meg boarded the mobile restaurant, the stairs behind him closed again. Meanwhile, Amy and Irina, who had boarded the spaceship first, were looking around curiously at the various joysticks and buttons. Once they entered the mobile restaurant, it was the control room. The brightly lit circular control room allowed them to see the scenery outside clearly, and it was enhanced by the night vision device. There were all kinds of LCD panels and dazzling lights. Everything was full of sci-fi colors, and it made Meg, a pseudo-sci-fi fan, gasp in amazement. "Wait, Amy, you can't just press these buttons." When Meg saw that Amy was about to press the red self-destruct button, he hurried over to her and carried her down from the center console. Only then did he heave a sigh of relief. "What's an interference bomb?" On the other side, Irina asked curiously. After thinking for a while, she pressed the orange button. Oh no! Meg couldn't stop in time at all. Hundreds of cannons appeared around the aircraft, and beams of dazzling fire shot out from the cannons into the sky. Then they exploded and turned into beautiful fireworks. "It's so beautiful!" Amy exclaimed as she leaned against the glass and looked at the beautiful fireworks. "Yes, so beautiful." Irina's eyes also lit up, and a smile appeared on her face. "Reloading interference bomb, 1,000,000 copper coins." The system's voice rang in Meg's mind. The corner of Meg's mouth twitched, but when he saw Irina and Amy smiling happily, he could only pretend that nothing had happened. 1,000,000 was nothing if he could make the beauty smile. "System, you treacherous arms dealer." Meg roared in his mind. "You two sit down first. You can look, but don't touch. Otherwise, we might fall from the sky," Meg said to the two of them. His fingers quickly tapped on the main control screen, and the mobile restaurant's flying posture began to be adjusted. 3 jets appeared at the rounded bottom, and purple-white flames shot out. With a whoosh, they disappeared from the sky above Amy's. What was that sound? Mabai, who was drunk, opened the window and looked out. There was only a white mark left in the sky, and there was a burnt smell in the air. He looked left and right and didn't see anything, so he closed the window and went back to sleep. Many people were awakened by the explosion, but when they opened the window or went out to check, Meg was already 50 kilometers away from Chaos City with a mobile restaurant. "This thing is flying so fast. It's even faster than Oz." Irina was shocked. Although she couldn't see very clearly at night, she could clearly feel that this strange-looking thing was even faster than Oz. It should be about the same as Oz's maximum speed, but it doesn't usually fly like that. Meg smiled. Oz's speed was still very fast, but it couldn't last for too long at its maximum speed. However, the mobile restaurant didn't have such a problem. As long as there was money, it could fly as long as it wanted. Oz was too big of a target, so Meg didn't bring it along for this trip to the Boundless Sea realm. Meg set the destination, and then clicked into the hosting mode. They would be able to reach the system's crayfish breeding base after waking up from their sleep. When he got the mobile restaurant, Meg also got the driving manual at the same time. He had already mastered the operation of the mobile restaurant completely. "All right, let's go take a look at the living area. Go to sleep first, and we'll be at the Boundless Sea realm when we wake up tomorrow." Meg carried Amy, who was starting to feel sleepy after her excitement, and walked towards the living area behind the central control room. The living area was bigger than Meg had imagined. It was about a small 2-bedroom apartment with 2 small bedrooms, a small living room and dining room, a small kitchen, and a washroom. Although it was small, it had all the essentials. The renovation style was similar to Amy's, low-key, luxurious, and classy. Amy and Irina slept in one room. Meg slept alone in the other, and ugly ducklings slept on the floor. Everyone fell asleep very quickly after the rooms were allocated. Although they were sleeping in the flying device that was flying at high speed, everyone didn't feel the slightest bit of shaking and slept very soundly. Ding! We have arrived at our destination. Early the next morning, Meg was woken up by a notification sound. Opening his eyes, Meg habitually looked at the alarm clock at the bedside. It was 6 in the morning, just like usual. However, when he opened the curtains while rubbing his sleepy eyes, a shark with its bloody mouth open suddenly bit at him. He was so scared that he flew back to the bed and grabbed the sword beside the bed. However, When the shark hit the flying device only spun around on the spot. Meg, who was in the flying device, didn't even feel anything. Instead, the shark broke a few teeth and swam away angrily. Only then did he heave a sigh of relief. It seemed like this flying device was very resistant to bites and collisions. However, after flying for an entire night, how did this flying device end up in the sea? Meg leaned close to the glass and looked out. In the clear sea water, he could see many deep-sea fish swimming around. Soon, his gaze landed on the black fog in the west. It dyed the sea water black as if something was hiding in it, and it was slowly spreading in all directions. And in the center of the black fog, there should be a small island. He could vaguely see the outline of it. "It's really the black fog," Meg whispered to himself. Bookhouse reading website. Chapter 1306. After successfully arriving at their destination and having a good night's sleep, Meg was not in a hurry to wake up the mother and daughter who were still asleep. He changed into his chef's uniform and went to the kitchen to make breakfast. There were not many ingredients in the fridge, but they were quite complete. Meg made a pot of congee with pork and century egg and fried dough sticks. "How do we get underwater?" Irina held Amy's hand and walked to the kitchen door. She looked at Meg, who was scooping up the fried dough sticks, and asked in confusion. "I saw a lot of fish. Father, are we having grilled fish for lunch today?" Amy asked with sparkling eyes. "It's harder to be discovered underwater. We're already near the black fog." Meg first answered Irina's question, then looked at Amy and nodded. "If Amy wants to eat, then let's have grilled fish for lunch." "Okay." Amy nodded happily. Black fog. Irina walked to the side of the restaurant and looked out through the transparent wall. She soon noticed the surging black fog in the distance. Although it was hundreds of meters away, she could still feel the disgusting aura of death. "Let's have breakfast first. After breakfast, we'll go and check out the situation. The black fog is larger than I expected. Besides, we need to know where we are now," Meg said to Irina. "Okay." Irina nodded and brought Amy to wash up. Then, they ate the breakfast that Meg had made. After breakfast, everyone went to the central control room. Meg canceled the takeover mode and manually drove the mobile restaurant slowly toward the black fog. He stopped 100 meters away. After getting closer, the surging black fog became clearer. The black fog was as thick as black ink. Just looking at it made people feel a sense of frustration. "Should I use the holy light to clear it?" Irina asked. "Let me check it out first." Meg shook his head. His fingers slid on the screen, and he called out the tripod drone. He clicked to launch it. A small water droplet-shaped submarine was ejected and steered toward the black fog silently. Soon, the big screen in the central control room showed the images sent back by the submarine. All kinds of fish could be seen clearly. Ugly Duckling lay in front of the screen and tried to grab those fish with its fat claws and stuff them into its mouth. "Is this your new pet?" Irina looked at the image in astonishment. This was the first time she had seen a magical beast that could transmit images back from such a long distance. "Sort of." Meg nodded. He did not know how to explain the existence of such advanced technology. The image turned black as soon as the submarine entered the black fog. However, the camera mode was quickly changed to infrared mode. There were still all kinds of fish in the surging black fog. However, there seemed to be some strange changes in their appearance and bones. They grew sharp teeth, and they were attacking and swallowing each other in the black fog. Meg saw a huge crayfish using its pincers to snap a conger eel. There were also many fish that attacked the small submarine. However, they were easily dodged by the accelerated submarine. "These fish look so scary," Amy said fearfully as she curled up in Irina's arms. Could it be because of the black fog? Irina looked at this scene with a grave expression. Those fish that were swallowing each other seemed to have lost their minds. That's most likely the case. It seems like the influence of the black fog is more serious than we thought. Mag also nodded with a grave expression. Right now, the black fog only had a radius of several hundred meters, and only a school of fish was affected. If the black fog expanded and engulfed some of the more powerful species, the consequences would be unimaginable. The small submarine quickly reached the shore. A bamboo dragonfly-shaped propeller appeared on top of the water droplet. It silently rose into the air and activated the aerial photography mode. The island was not large. It was an irregular circle with a diameter of less than a kilometer. The black fog had already shrouded the entire island and was spreading in all directions with the island as the center. Through the infrared camera, they could see a group of monkeys on the island. Just like the school of fish at the bottom of the sea, the monkeys were also killing each other. Mutilated monkey corpses could be seen everywhere. Some of them were even 3 meters tall. After swallowing each other, these monkeys seemed to have evolved. "Looks like this is an uninhabited island," Meg said softly. This was the only thing that made him feel relieved. He was ready to retrieve the drone. "Father, look, there's a round fatty over there," Amy suddenly said as she pointed to the bottom right of the screen. This is only a blurry round figure could be seen on the screen. Turning the camera and zooming in, there was indeed a big fatty kneeling in front of a stone statue in the center of the screen. Because it was too round, it looked like a round ball. Only a rough outline of the stone statue could be seen in the thick black fog. It seemed to be a skeleton. With this body shape, it might be a demon from the Abyss demon clan, Irina said as she leaned forward slightly. "Our current position is 350 kilometers west of the Abyss Island. It's still within the waters of the Abyss Island, so it's very likely that it's the abyssal demons." Mag nodded in agreement after glancing at the map. Previously, when the Abyss Demon Clan and the Giant Dragon Clan were negotiating peace, he had received an Abyss Demon and had a deep impression of the big fatty riding a pig. Moreover, the Abyss Demon Clan was also one of the masterminds in the ambush. Abyss Lord Alfred was on Irina's kill list for this trip. Initially, they thought that it was an uninhabited island. They did not expect that an Abyss Demon would be involved, causing a sudden change in the black fog clearing operation. "He seems to be saying something. Perhaps we can find out what happened to board from him." Meg turned the drone's invisibility function to the maximum and slowly approached the voice. With the cover of the trees, the drone quickly approached the Abyss Demon. A dreamlike voice gradually became clearer. Alfred, serve the master. Power, offer my soul." The drone stopped about 10 meters away. They could see the meatball that was like a small mountain. The words he said intermittently shocked Meg and Irina. "I didn't expect it to be Alfred, offering his soul in exchange for power. Is he making a deal with the devil?" Irina frowned. "What's a deal with the devil?" Meg asked, puzzled. "This is an ancient legend. Fallen creatures sell their souls to the devil in exchange for terrifying power. This is a deal with the devil," Irina said softly. "I'm afraid this is not just a legend." Meg looked at Alfred, whose body was gradually expanding, and said with a serious expression. Chapter 13:07. The strange black fog, the crazy creatures, and the abyssal lord who made a deal with the devil. All of these made this island seem mysterious and scary. The legend had become reality, and it was right in front of them. What could make Borg and Alfred, who were the top beings of the entire continent, sell their souls for power? What do they see in this black fog? What kind of terrifying power do they want to obtain? This was what made Meg feel really uneasy. What kind of power was behind this black fog? What was the purpose behind this deal? They had no idea now. Borg had already been killed, and Alfred was accepting the deal to become even more powerful. At the same time, there might be more black fog appearing in many places in this world. What should we do now? Why don't we kill him while they're making the deal? Anyway, this fatty is at the top of my must-kill list. Irina looked at Meg and asked, "If there's no black fog, you might be able to kill Alfred, but in this black fog, we might not be his match." Meg shook his head. He had a faint fear of this black fog and didn't want Irina to step into it to fight. As the Abyssal Lord, Alfred was also a powerful 10th-tier demon. His strength was second only to the Abyssal Elder among the Abyssal demons. After receiving the support of the mysterious power, he might not be weaker than Irina. Killing Alfred was indeed a good fuse to stir up internal strife among the demons. But this meant that they had to completely hide their identities, and they needed a chance to kill him in one shot. So, we're just going to watch him continue to become stronger? Alina's brows furrowed. Borg had clearly made a deal with the being in the black mist back then, and had become powerful and difficult to deal with. She didn't think it was a good idea to continue watching Alfred become more powerful. System, you should be responsible for all the consumption caused by clearing the black fog, right? Meg asked. This. The system was a little hesitant. According to the countdown, the black fog will reach the second barricade in 8 hours. When that time comes, the black fog will be too large to be cleared, and the whole lobster base might fall, Meg said calmly. I don't mind eating less lobsters. I mind. The system roared. The 300,000 crayfish had already cost it $30 million. Now, there were still 1 million crayfish in the farm. Most of them had already reached the size where they could be sold. If the net was broken, then it would really lose everything. Weapon authorization complete. The cost of clearing the black fog will be borne by the system. A notification sounded. Very good. The corners of Meg's mouth curled up slightly. His fingers quickly tapped on the main screen, and the camera that was originally in the reconnaissance mode separated. The camera began to move upward, and the lower half of the cone quickly reassembled, turning into a cone-shaped missile. It changed its direction and aimed at the hazy stone statue in front of Alfred. Fire. Meg pressed the red button firmly. Red flames shot out from the bottom of the missile, and the spiral-shaped projectile spun wildly as it flew toward the stone statue. The moment the missile ignited, the intense flame fluctuations also alarmed Alfred. Its large and fat body nimbly turned around, and its red eyes stared at the small silver thing that was moving at a terrifying speed. A trace of surprise and anger appeared in its eyes, and its large hand that was like a millstone fiercely slammed down on the missile. Boom! The millstone-like hand slammed the missile into the ground, but the missile's trajectory did not change. It still accurately hit the hazy stone statue, and then it exploded with a loud bang. From the slightly shaky image transmitted by the camera, a red mushroom cloud could be seen rising from the center of the island. Everything on the island was blown to pieces by the explosion, including the few monkeys that had successfully evolved. The entire island was filled with black dust, and the infrared camera was also greatly affected. The aftermath of the explosion spread to the bottom of the sea, and the frenzied fish in the black fog were almost all shaken to death. Countless marine fish scuttled past the mobile restaurant and fled in the opposite direction. Irina stared at the image for a while, blinked, and turned to look at Meg. Did you do that? Did Father throw a fireball at the island? Amy was also looking at Meg with a hint of surprise on her face. Something like that, but I still don't know magic. Meg nodded. He was also a little surprised by the power of the bomb, which raised the entire island to the ground. I really can't see through you anymore. Irina raised her eyebrows, but there was a smile in her eyes. Of course, the more powerful her man was, the better. Moreover, not being able to see through him made him even more mysterious and tempting to explore. Father is so powerful, even more powerful than Amy's fireball. Amy entered the state of a little fangirl, looking at Meg with a face of worship. Naturally accepting the worship from his wife and daughter, Meg operated the camera to zoom in and said, an explosion of this level shouldn't be able to kill Alfred. Sure enough, as the dust dispersed, a large crater with a diameter of tens of meters appeared in the center of the island. Alfred's image quickly reappeared in the center of the crater. Although his injuries could not be seen clearly, overall, there were no missing arms or legs. This is really a top tank. Meg pursed his lips. An explosion of this level could even make a hole in a steel plate, but this guy was in the center of the explosion and was completely fine. His defense could not be simply described as amazing. However, the mysterious stone statue that originally stood in front of him was blown into rubble. The strange thing was that the stone statue did not explode into powder like the surrounding stones. It was only shattered into a dozen or so pieces of black gravel of different sizes. Moreover, it was attracted by a mysterious force and began to approach at a speed visible to the naked eye. Who is it? Who dares to ruin my business? Alfred let out a roar, holding a huge iron rod, his red eyes sweeping left and right. He had been preparing for 3 days and 3 nights. Just as he was about to succeed, the transaction had been interrupted. He had only accepted half of that formidable strength. As long as he accepted the other half, he could become the strongest master of the abyssal demon race, or even the entire abyssal demon race. The fireball from before was about the 8th level of damage. Which blind guy dared to ruin his business? Alfred strode around the island and did not find any other demons. It seemed that the guy released the fireball and ran away. Could it be the guy from the Flaming Demon clan? Alfred returned to the crater and frowned as he muttered to himself. He glanced to the west, which was only 100 miles away from the Flaming Island, and said fiercely, "When I absorb all the power, the first thing I will do is take care of the Flaming Demon clan." Chapter 1308. It would take at least 3 days for the broken stone statue on the ground to reassemble before the transaction could be opened again. I must go back to participate in the Abyss Feast today. Alfred anxiously walked a few laps around the stone statue fragments, summoned a ferocious 3-headed hellhound to guard the island, and left on a huge demonic beast. This 3-headed hellhound was a level 8 demonic beast that only recognized him as its master. Anything that entered the island would be torn to pieces by it. Okay, it's time for us to do it. Meg looked at Alfred in the image and said with a smile. He could easily deal with a level 8 or level 3 hellhound. Before Alfred returned to the island, he must clear the black fog and destroy the strange stone statue. With Alfred's cunning, he will definitely come back again. If we don't want to fight him now, maybe we should wait a little longer. Irina sat in the chair and was not in a hurry to get up. Meg heard this and sat back in the chair. Sure enough, half an hour later, Alfred rode the demonic beast back to the island again. After confirming that no one had been on the island, he scattered 2 big bags of abyssal venomous worms before leaving. Demons are really cunning. Meg looked at the venomous worms that quickly drilled into the cracks of the stone and could not help but have a headache. The abyssal venomous worms were extremely poisonous, and a bite could be fatal. He probably won't come back this time. Irina got up and took out her magic caster's staff. Then let's start clearing the black fog. Meg nodded and controlled the mobile restaurant to move in the direction of the black fog, stopping about 10 meters away. As the fish in the black fog were killed by the aftermath of the previous explosion and the stone statue was damaged, the black fog seemed to have quieted down and did not continue to expand outwards. However, in this deep sea, the black fog that was as thick as black ink was still terrifying. "What do you need me to do?" Irina asked. As she approached the black fog, the sense of disgust in her heart grew stronger. The thick aura of death and the aura of life were 2 completely opposite existences. Meg looked at Irina and said, "If my judgment is not wrong, your holy light magic should have a purifying effect on this black fog. I need you to use holy light to clear all the black fog before we can land on the island. The real research value should be the stone statue." In this world, perhaps only Irina could see through the black fog. Meg was somewhat glad about this. Of course, was he a man who would live off a woman? Okay. Irina nodded. What about me? What about me? Amy came up to Meg excitedly and asked, "Father, what can I do for you? Those poisonous bugs on the island can only be dealt with by Xiaomi. If we're bitten by them, our bodies will rot and we will die." Mag looked at Amy with a serious expression and asked, "Amy, can you complete this difficult mission?" "I promise to complete the mission." Amy nodded solemnly. Her eyes shone with excitement. She did not expect her father to entrust her with such an important mission. The mobile restaurant emerged from the water and hovered 3 meters above the sea surface. The hatch slowly opened. "Holy light, please heed my call. Cleanse this filthy world and destroy all evil." Irina raised the magic staff above her head and chanted a spell. A bright silver light gathered at the tip of the magic staff and was suddenly released. A beam of holy light that was countless times more intense than the sun's rays shot out from the staff, instantly piercing through the dark fog. Wherever it passed, the black fog quickly melted like snow meeting fire, revealing a clear path. It's really effective. Meg was elated. His judgment was not wrong. The holy light was indeed very effective against the black fog. What a powerful light. Can I learn it? Amy looked at Irina with admiration. If she could learn it, she would not have to carry a fireball when she went out at night. It would be much more convenient. Purify evil power. Irina waved her magic caster staff, and holy light swept out like a blackboard filled with words. The black fog that enveloped the island and the sea within hundreds of kilometers was instantly wiped away by the holy light, and the surrounding sea became clear again. All kinds of completely deformed fish floated on the surface of the sea, and they all had sharp teeth and looked extremely terrifying. Meg looked at this scene and could not help but gulp. At this moment, the system's voice sounded in Meg's mind. Congratulations, host. The black fog removal mission is completed. You have received the full set of crayfish cooking recipes. Living off a woman was really good. Perfect. Meg looked at Irina with admiration. Her strength was actually not in combat. Light magic and life magic were not good for combat magic. It was only because her past achievements were too impressive that people gradually neglected this point. This was a woman who was favored by the goddess of light and the goddess of life at the same time. She should have been high and mighty and accepted the worship of the world, but she played herself into a powerful combat magic. It's easier than I thought. Irina put away the magic staff. She was also a little surprised that the black fog was removed so easily. Then let's go to the island. Meg piloted the mobile restaurant and flew toward the island. After the black fog was removed, there was still some dust from the explosion floating above the island. It did not affect their vision anymore. The traces left behind by the missile explosion were also clearly visible. The entire island was razed to the ground. There was almost no intact stone. In the center of the island, there was a huge pit with a diameter of more than 50 meters and a depth of more than 5 meters. The three-headed devil hound was guarding the big pit. 3 pairs of scarlet eyes stared at the mobile restaurant above the big pit and roared crazily. The three-headed devil hound was more than 10 meters long and 7 to 8 meters tall. It had 3 big dog heads, sharp fangs, scarlet eyes, and a snake tail. It was somewhat similar to the three-headed hellhound in Greek mythology. It was unknown if the two were related. Leave this puppy to me. Amy, I'll leave the poisonous bug to you. Don't let your mother tire herself out. Meg smiled and patted Amy's head. He held a sword and directly jumped down from a height of 100 meters toward the three-headed devil hound. After breaking through to grade 8, he had not found a decent opponent to test his sword on. This watchdog was a good choice. Seeing Meg descending from the sky, the three-headed devil hound went into a frenzy. One of the dog heads spat out a ball of fire, while the other one spat out a ball of ice flame toward Meg. A surprising move, but it's more interesting this way. Meg smiled. His body that was falling vertically suddenly flipped backward the moment before it collided with the flames and ice flames. He narrowly avoided the attacks of the two and, at the same time, cut off the tail that had turned into a poisonous snake that was biting at him. Poisonous bug, I'm going to destroy you. Amy also pulled out her wand and began to chant something. She pointed it downward, and a vast expanse of flames instantly descended from the sky. Aside from a 100-meter radius around Mag, the entire island was engulfed in flames. Accompanied by a series of crackling sounds, the 5-colored poisonous bug turned into ashes in the fire. Chapter 1309. The python-like viper was cut in half by the sword. The three-headed hellhound let out a roar, and the 3 ferocious dog heads turned at the same time, biting towards Meg. Mag dodged to the side to avoid one of the dog's heads. He leaped up and stomped the dog's head in the middle into the ground. His body suddenly rose up, and he avoided the dog's head that was coming at him from the side. He landed on the dog's back and stabbed his sword into the three-headed hellhound's spine. The huge three-headed hellhound let out a scream and fell to the ground. It whimpered a few times and then completely stopped breathing. Mag landed on the ground lightly. He swung his blood-stained, long sword downwards and nailed the venomous snake that was still trying to ambush him to the ground. He glanced at the dead, three-headed demon hound and shook his head disinterestedly. The growth of a knight's strength depended on the improvement of speed and strength through cultivation, as well as the mastery of combat skills through comprehension of battle. Powerful knights generally had powerful and gorgeous combat skills, such as flame-devouring wave, battle-chi horse, cross out this one. But Meg was a little special. The combat skills created by Alex were not gorgeous, and sometimes he even doubted whether they could be called combat skills. There were no resounding names of combat skills, nor were there any gorgeous special effects. There were some that raised the body's strength and speed to the extreme and used the simplest and most effective sword. Just like the sword he used to kill the three-headed hellhound, it was an ordinary sword, and even a level 1 knight could use the same move. Against a magical beast of the same level, he almost didn't waste a trace of strength and used the simplest way to kill it. This was his fighting style. Father is getting more and more powerful, such a scary big dog, and he killed it in an instant. Amy clapped her little hands and shouted. In the past, when they went out, they were chased by the big pig, but now their father could easily kill them. Irina's face also showed a trace of a smile. The familiar fighting style, the seemingly simple sword, whether it was the grasp of timing or the search for the fatal point, he was still the most powerful knight. Come down. Meg waved at the mobile restaurant, and the suspended restaurant quickly descended, stopping 3 meters from the ground. The spiral ladder slowly lowered, and Irina held Amy's little hand and walked down. Be careful. There may be poisonous insects here, Meg reminded, and walked towards the broken stone statue in the middle of the big pit covered in a layer of black fog. From the fragments, the stone statue should be about 3 meters tall. The head that fell to the side was still intact. It was a skull, and 2 red stones were embedded in the deep eye sockets, still emitting a faint light. What is this thing? Meg walked forward, stood, 3 meters away, and squatted down to look at the skull. The skull's carving was a little rough, but it looked very old, and it should have existed for a very long time. Moreover, there were some earthworm-like words carved on the side of the face, and it looked very different from the continent's common language. Meg stared at the words seriously, and the stone statue's eyes suddenly flashed red, and Meg felt as if his spirit was sucked into a whirlpool, and with a wave of dizziness, he arrived in a huge black stone hall. The stone hall was more than 10 meters tall, built with huge black stones, and the walls were lit with ghostly green flames. In the middle of the empty hall stood only Meg alone, and he looked particularly small. At the end of the hall, there was a huge stone chair, and a tall skeleton, wearing a black cloak, sat on the stone chair, looking at Meg with scarlet eyes, and a low voice sounded, "Young man, do you desire power? System, there's someone here who stole your lines." Meg curled his lips and looked at the skeleton sitting on the chair. Could this be the legendary Bone King? This skeleton looked very similar to the stone statue from before, and he was pulled into this mysterious space for no reason when he was observing the mysterious words on the stone statue's head. It seemed that this should be the mysterious person behind the black fog. What a straightforward opening. If he had just arrived in this mysterious space, he might have been hot-headed, and it might have been another brutal reincarnation story. Seeing that Meg didn't answer, the skeleton's eyes flashed red, and scenes began to appear in Meg's mind. In the northern snowy plains, a pack of brutal snow wolves madly chased nomads. The horses couldn't escape the pursuit of the snow wolves, and the nomads were pounced on one by one, and then they were eaten by the snow wolves. In this bloody chase, only a little boy escaped, and there was a sword hanging on the back of his horse. Meg recognized it. It was the Tian-Du sword. This was what happened to Alex when he was young. Meg was deep in thought as he looked at the youth who was facing the north, kneeling in the snow and crying. Then the scene changed. In the northern border of the Roth Empire, a group of imperial cavalrymen was surrounded by orcs several times their number. As the leader of the cavalrymen, Alex could only watch his subordinates and brothers die in the siege, even though he could fight against 10 orcs alone. In the end, only 6 of the 100-odd cavalrymen managed to escape the siege. The scene changed again. It was raining cats and dogs. Alex, who was wearing a suit of armor and a general's waist token, was carrying a baby in swaddling clothes on his back. He was heavily surrounded, and powerful magic shrouded the sky. Hundreds of heavy cavalrymen charged at him. The demons were laughing, and the elven archer's arrows were aimed at the baby on his back. After a great battle, Alex, who was lying in a pool of blood, opened his eyes and watched as those fellows snickered as they severed his tendons and injected cursed magic into his body. They then kicked the swaddling child dozens of meters away and left without a second thought. Meg slowly clenched his fists as he watched that figure crawling towards the swaddling clothes with difficulty in the rainy night. Yes, at times like this, what he craved the most was power. "Young man, do you crave power?" The seductive voice sounded in Meg's ears again. "Accept my deal and become my servant. You will become the most powerful person in this world and kill these fellows easily." That voice continued to tempt Meg as though it was directly in his mind. Who would be able to withstand such a trick? Meg raised his eyebrows slightly. If he had only seen those scenes from a third person's perspective, he might have agreed at all costs. However, he was not Alex, after all. Although he was a little angry, he did not lose his rationality. Therefore, he opened his eyes and looked at the skeleton sitting on the chair. He shook his head with a smile and said, "No, I crave to cook." The skeleton's red eyes flickered as though he was surprised by Meg's answer. "Who exactly are you? What's the purpose of setting up this black fog?" Meg asked the skeleton as he kept his smile. Chapter 13:10. This world will eventually return to the rule of this king. The undead army has already embarked on their journey. Meg heard the last sentence before he escaped from the vortex. Then he opened his eyes and subconsciously took 2 steps back. He met Irina's blue eyes. "Are you okay?" Irina reached out and grabbed Meg's hand to prevent him from losing his balance. She looked at him worriedly. "You were bewitched by the skull." "I'm fine." Meg shook his head. Only then did he realize that his back was completely drenched in sweat. After he asked that question, the skeleton man flew into a rage. Endless black fog filled the hall, and groups of skeleton cavalry began to attack him, leaving him with nowhere to run. If it wasn't for a beam of light piercing through the dome of the hall at the last moment and shaking him out of the hall, he might not have been able to return. Mag glanced at the stone statue that was smashed into smithereens on the ground. The black fog had completely dissipated. Such a violent move was obviously done by Irina, who was holding his hand with a worried expression. "I'm fine. I was too reckless." Meg shook his head and said apologetically. He still underestimated the stone statue. He thought that after it was shattered, it wouldn't be that scary. He didn't expect to fall into its trap. "Bad stone statue. Stupid stone statue. How dare you bully my father? I'll burn you to ashes." At the side, Aimi was throwing fireballs at the stone statue that had been smashed into pieces. The burning flames quickly burned the stone statue into a pile of white ash and completely disappeared. "What did you see?" Irina asked Meg. "Let's go up first. We should leave this place," Meg said. He looked at the pile of white ash and thought for a moment. Then, he took out a dustpan and swept all the white ash into a pile. When they got on the mobile restaurant, Meg asked Amy to burn the 3-headed hellhound with a fireball. Then, he drove the mobile restaurant to the bottom of the sea again. "Father, that stupid dog is already dead. Why do you want to burn it again?" Amy asked in confusion. Irina also looked at Meg curiously. "If we can create a rift in the alliance between the Abyss demons and the Flaming demons, or even tear them apart, it will be a good thing for world peace," Meg said with a smile. Since Alfred had long been dissatisfied with the Flaming demon tribe, he naturally did not mind taking advantage of the situation and making them completely turn against each other. With Alfred's brain, he will definitely think that the Flaming demons did it, Irina said with a smile, looking at Meg with admiration. "This was really a good plan. I was just dragged into a mysterious black hole." Meg told Irina about his experience just now. The elves were a very ancient race. Their long lifespan allowed them to have a more coherent history and inheritance than humans. As the elven princess, she might know something. The undead army has already embarked on their journey. Irina repeated Meg's last words. Her beautiful eyebrows furrowed. After thinking for a while, she shook her head. The legend of exchanging souls with the devil was told to me by my mother when I was young, but I don't remember if she mentioned the undead army. I haven't read many ancient books of the elves. It seems that it will take some time to find out what this sentence means. Meg was slightly disappointed. It seemed that there was no shortcut. If necessary, I can make a trip back to the Wind Forest. Although the queen is still in seclusion, I know where those ancient books are kept, Irina said. She also felt that this black fog was unusual. If the skeleton people's undead army really existed, and they had already embarked on their journey to conquer the Northern continent, then they had to understand what kind of existence they were. That's too risky. Meg shook his head. He did not want to put Irina in danger again. We can find out about them through other channels. I have established some connections with Chaos City now. They might be able to help. All right. Irina glanced at Amy and nodded. Then, she asked, where are we going next? The black fog has been cleared, and the stone statues have been destroyed. However, the fog of war shrouding the Demon Islands is getting thicker and thicker. Our objective for this trip is to destroy the alliance among the demons so that they will be too tired to deal with the conflicts among the various races on the islands. That way, they won't be able to make a unified voice at the peace talks in a month's time. Meg brought out the map of the Demon Islands. Every island represented a demon race. The more powerful the demon race, the bigger the island, and the closer it was to the center. Irina pondered for a moment and said, assassinate the powerhouses of the various demon races and then frame the other demons? That's a simple and effective method. Meg nodded. This method was indeed very effective. As long as it was done properly, it would be very easy to stir up trouble between the two races, especially among the generally irritable demons. Apart from that, we still need an identity. Meg pointed at a medium-sized island near the center. Carapace Island. We will be staying here with our identities concealed for a period of time, and we will open a restaurant. A new restaurant? Amy asked with sparkling eyes. Yes. Meg nodded. The most effective way to eliminate the 300,000 escaping crayfish was probably through the mouth of a foodie. Concealing our identities means we have to pretend to be demons? Irina asked after pondering. Yes. That way, we won't be noticed easily. Meg nodded. Otherwise, with Irina's reputation, the whole world would probably know that Irina had opened a crayfish restaurant on Carapace Island the moment the restaurant opened. Sounds interesting. Irina's face revealed some anticipation. She used to love concealing her identity and doing interesting things. Otherwise, most people would stay away from her, and it would be very boring. Before that, let's go and get some ingredients. Meg controlled the mobile restaurant and dived into the deep sea. Host, what are you planning to do? The system's nervous voice sounded. Inspect the ingredients base. Since we're here, we can't go back empty-handed, right? Meg said matter-of-factly. Host, please mind your words. This is the crayfish breeding base of this system. It's not open to the public. System? That's not right. You said that as a crayfish catcher, you might supply the restaurant with crayfish in the future. Out of responsibility to the customers, shouldn't I personally see how you breed the crayfish? As a chef with principles, shouldn't I take the lead and test the poison first? If you do that, then I don't want your crayfish anymore, Meg said with a pout. The system was silent for a long time, and then a notification that the access was open sounded. After passing through the transparent net, a group of palm-sized, arm-length prawns swam past the mobile restaurant slowly. Damn, they're so big, Meg exclaimed as he looked at the big prawns that had the size of an Australian lobster and the appearance of a crayfish. There's so many big prawns. Amy also threw herself in front of the glass wall and swallowed her saliva. She turned to look at Meg and said, Father, let's not have grilled fish for lunch today. Let's have these big prawns. Bookhouse Reading Website. Chapter 1311. The mobile restaurant was equipped with a catcher. Catching the large number of crayfish was naturally a piece of cake. Meg caught dozens of crayfish in a short while. Before he could enjoy himself, the mobile restaurant was forcefully removed from the crayfish breeding base. System, you're too stingy. I only caught a few crayfish. I just helped you recover tens of millions of losses. Meg pouted and complained. The average net weight of the crayfish in the breeding base is more than 1 kilogram. The host has already caught 35 crayfish. It's enough for the three of you to eat for 2 to 3 days. Host, please don't be greedy. The system protested sternly. Meg looked at the crayfish that were tightly squeezed in the water tank next to him. There was really no place to keep them if he caught more. All right, but don't tell me that we really have to catch every last one of these 300,000 crayfish. If that's the case, I guess I'll have to be a crayfish catcher here for the rest of my life. Meg asked, in order to prevent random hybridization from causing genetic mutations, most of the crayfish have been sterilized. However, among the crayfish that I kept as breeding crayfish, there were more than 100 that escaped from the net. In order to prevent these crayfish from becoming an invasive species, the host's main target is these 100 breeding crayfish. Meg looked at the crayfish that were raising their pincers and smashing the tempered glass loudly. Normal fish and crayfish were no match for them. System, this is a foreign world. There's no lack of demonic beasts at the bottom of the sea, right? Although these crayfish have become giant crayfish, isn't it a little too much to say that they're invincible? Meg frowned. Although 100 breeding crayfish did not sound like a lot, there was no difference between finding 100 breeding crayfish and 300,000 crayfish in this vast sea. In order to let these crayfish have better environmental adaptability and increase their survival rate, I added a layer of paralyzing toxin on their outer shell when I was adjusting their genes. Once touched, it will cause paralysis or even coma. That's why normal demonic beasts and fishes wouldn't eat them as food. You're really a fucking genius. However, the toxin will disappear after heating them to 100 degrees Celsius. The system added. Meg looked at the crayfish that were waving their pincers in the water tank and thought about how to eat them. Ugly Duckling reached its fat paw into the water tank and tried to catch a crayfish. Right at this moment, a crayfish suddenly raised its pincers and clamped its paw. Cat! Ugly Duckling jumped 2 meters into the air and brought the lobster out of the water tank with it. It crashed onto the ground with a thud. Ugly Duckling. Amy looked at Ugly Duckling's mind's eye. Bye. Of the crayfish. Of the crayfish. Of the crayfish of the mind. It fainted next to the crayfish's of the crayfish of its mind. Amy and Irina looked at Ugly Duckling, which had fainted in shock. Seeing that the crayfish was about to escape, Amy skipped over and was about to hold it down. Amy, you can't touch the crayfish with your hands. Meg walked over first and stepped on the crayfish's back. Ugly Duckling fainted. This crayfish seems to be poisonous, Irina said as she reached out to touch Ugly Duckling. Ugly Duckling, which had fainted for 3 seconds, opened its eyes and woke up on its own. It got up from the ground and stared at the crayfish that Meg was stepping on with its eyes wide open. It seemed to still be in a daze. Meg, who was about to ask the system for a way to save the crayfish, looked at Ugly Duckling in surprise. It seemed like this little fellow's poison resistance was pretty good. There's a paralyzing toxin on the shell of this crayfish. You'll pass out if you touch it directly, so you can't use your hands to grab it directly. Meg explained. He took a pair of gloves from the side and put them on before lifting up the crayfish that he was stepping on with his feet. Calling it a crayfish was a little unfair. After all, its size was comparable to the average Australian crayfish, and its strength was astonishing. Holding in his hand was like grabbing a crazily struggling piglet. 2 pincers that were thicker and stronger than a green crab were waving around. Meg had no doubt that these pincers could easily snap a finger or even a steel bar. Then, can we still eat them? Amy asked worriedly. She had never eaten crayfish like this before. As long as we cook them, the toxin will disappear and we can eat them. Meg nodded with a smile. He was also looking forward to the taste of these crayfish. That's great. Then, when can we eat them? Amy was elated as she looked at Meg expectantly. It'll take some time to get to Carapace Island, so I'll steam 3 crayfish to try first. Meg scooped up 3 crayfish from the water tank with a net and walked towards the kitchen. The system had already given him the entire set of crayfish recipes as a reward, but he didn't have the time to check them just now. While he was processing the crayfish in the kitchen, he clicked on the shiny recipes in his mind. A huge amount of information surged into his mind instantly. The cooking experiences of the various crayfish masters and the best recipes that were selected after being picked by countless diners all flowed into Meg's mind. Although the system gave him a chance to enter the test field for the god of cookery, it was daytime now, and he had already promised to make crayfish for Amy. Hence, Meg chose the simplest steamed crayfish. The crayfish reared by the system were more special. The clear seawater and a natural stocking method made the crayfish very clean. It wouldn't be a problem even if it was directly dismembered and made into crayfish sashimi. Hence, Meg only washed it simply and poured a mouthful of 56 degrees ergo 2 into the crayfish's mouth. After it was mesmerized, he removed the crayfish's veins and placed it in the steamer with the ginger slices already arranged. The 3 large crayfish filled the steamer, and he covered it with a lid and steamed it on high heat. Ergo 2 was an ingredient provided by the system. Meg didn't like to drink liquor with a high alcohol content, but it was indeed a very good choice to get rid of the fishy smell. Although steamed crayfish was simple, the taste was determined by the dipping sauce. While the crayfish were still steaming in the pot, Meg started to mix the dipping sauce. Irina's taste was on the lighter side, and she didn't like spicy things that much. Hence, he made a dipping sauce that was light but didn't lose its taste for Irina. On the other hand, Amy's taste was on the heavier side, and she liked both spicy and sour things. She was already half a little girl who liked spicy things. Hence, he added an extra spoonful of chili powder to her dipping sauce and poured some spicy hot oil over it. The crayfish could also taste spicy. On the other hand, his taste was more varied, and he belonged to the kind that could eat anything. In order to taste the crayfish's own taste, he only added a little vinegar to his dipping sauce. Ding! The alarm clock at the side rang. Meg immediately turned off the fire and opened the lid. The aroma of wine rushed out, and 3 large crayfish that had already turned bright red appeared in front of him. Chapter 13:12. The mellow aroma of wine, accompanied by the fresh smell of shrimp, wafted over. With the simplest processing method and the best ingredients, a delicious steamed crayfish was created. The big crayfish that was baring its fangs and brandishing its claws could almost cover its head. "It smells so good, Father. Are the big crayfish ready?" Amy had already come to the kitchen door. She took a deep breath of the fragrance in the air and looked at Meg's back expectantly. "It does smell good." Irina also came to the door and nodded. She subconsciously swallowed her saliva. "Yes, wash your hands and get ready to eat the crayfish," Meg said with a smile. He took the crayfish out of the steamer and put them on 3 plates. He served them with the dipping sauce and walked to the dining room. The 2 catty big crayfish took up an entire plate. The bright red shell was still majestic, but the 2 big pincers could no longer be waved. Amy washed her hands and quickly climbed onto the chair. She looked at the big crayfish with her mouth slightly open and said, "Wow, what a big crayfish. It's much bigger than the ones in the dining room." The big crayfish and the big crayfish used to make Yangzhou fried rice were indeed incomparable. Irina sat down beside Meg and looked at the big red crayfish in front of her. She asked, "Is it okay to touch it now?" "Yes. Now you only need to peel off the shell and dip it in the dipping sauce to eat." Meg nodded and grabbed his big crayfish with his hand. He first pried open the shell of the crayfish. The crayfish roe was so full that it almost overflowed from the head. The granules were clear and plump. Just looking at it made him feel overjoyed. Meg scooped up a spoonful of crayfish roe and fed it to Amy. Amy took it with her mouth wide open. She chewed and her eyes lit up. She quickly swallowed it and said in surprise, "Oh, this yellow thing is so delicious. It's soft and fragrant. Father is the best." "Me too." Irina opened her mouth slightly, waiting for Meg to feed her. Meg glanced at the remaining half of the crayfish butter and then looked at the expectant Irina. He had no choice but to scoop up the remaining half of the crayfish butter and carefully feed it to Irina, who had her mouth wide open. What to do? The daughter-in-law and the daughter were competing for favor. Could this be a single-choice question? The scrumptious crayfish butter had a very delicate texture and almost melted with a single bite. The fresh taste was released in the mouth, and there was even a hint of wine aroma, which made the scrumptiousness seem to have been elevated, bringing about a very delightful culinary experience. A smile appeared on Irina's lips as she looked at Mag with admiration and said, "It's indeed very delicious." Then eat more. After being praised by the two people he loved the most, Meg felt as sweet as honey in his heart. So what if he ate less of the crayfish butter? He helped them open the crayfish's head and revealed the crayfish butter inside. "You worked so hard to make it. You should try it too." Irina scooped up a big spoonful of the crayfish butter and fed it to Meg. Meg hesitated for a moment. He looked at Irina's smiling face and took the crayfish butter with a smile. The crayfish butter had a very rich taste, and it was more fragrant and pleasant than the Australian lobster. The texture was delicate and smooth, and it slid on the tip of the tongue and then into the stomach. The crayfish butter was the brain of the crayfish. If one ate the crayfish without taking a bite of the crayfish head, one would feel that they were not eating the soul of the crayfish. However, the crayfish butter of ordinary crayfish could not be eaten with a spoon. Meg could no longer imagine the satisfaction of taking a bite of this big crayfish after it was made into a spicy crayfish. A mouthful of crayfish butter was simply unimaginable. "Father, I want to give you a big bite too." Amy also scooped up a big spoonful of crayfish and fed it to Meg. "Little Amy, eat by yourself. Father is already late." Meg smiled and turned the spoon back to Amy. After watching her eat, he picked up her crayfish and peeled off the shell, revealing the crayfish meat that was as thick as a person's wrist. The white crayfish meat, with a few hints of translucent crystal, lay quietly in the shell. It was so plump that it almost overflowed. The fresh and fragrant smell of the crayfish made one's heart race. Meg picked up a Western knife and cut the crayfish according to the sections on the crayfish meat. From the feedback of the knife, he could feel the plump and springy crayfish meat. "Use this dipping sauce and eat it like you eat hot pot." Meg passed the fork to Amy, then pushed her spicy dipping sauce a little in front of her. "Okay." Amy forked a piece of crayfish meat, dipped it in the dipping sauce, and put it into her mouth. The more she chewed, the more fragrant the bouncy crayfish meat became. Her body couldn't help but sway slightly. Without waiting for Meg to do anything, Irina had already imitated him and lifted the crayfish cover. She elegantly picked up the knife and fork, sliced the crayfish, then dipped it in the dipping sauce in front of her and put it into her mouth. As soon as it entered her mouth, the tip of her tongue could clearly feel the texture of the crayfish meat. The smooth and tender texture was amazing. Chewing lightly, the bouncy texture gradually made her teeth happy. The rich and sweet taste of the crayfish instantly exploded, completely awakening her taste buds. The taste of the dipping sauce wasn't abrupt. Instead, it perfectly set off the unique freshness of the crayfish. It was as if the crayfish had come back to life in her mouth, baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. At this moment, she seemed to have turned into a crayfish, waving a pair of large pincers and swimming freely in the sea. "This taste, it's so delicious." Irina couldn't help but praise. Meg had a smile at the corner of his mouth. Since they were eating happily, he was naturally happy too. After peeling off the crayfish shell, he directly used a fork to pick up the whole crayfish meat, dipped it in a simple vinegar dish, and took a big bite. The plump and bouncy crayfish brought a taste that made one's soul tremble, and the big mouthful of crayfish meat made one instantly burst with happiness. The slightly sour vinegar made the taste buds start to become active first, and then it welcomed the king. The fresh and sweet gravy sputtered in the mouth. The plump crayfish meat was so bouncy, and the fresh taste of the crayfish itself bloomed in the chewing. "This feeling is too good, isn't it?" After swallowing a mouthful of crayfish meat, Meg looked at the crayfish on the fork and his eyes lit up. Even the Boston lobster wasn't half as delicious as this crayfish. The plump crayfish, mouthful after mouthful, the feeling of happiness was endless, and it was addictive. The two caddies of large crayfish went into their stomachs, and even the pincers were clean. The three of them were still a little unsatisfied. Burp, Amy burped, held a pincer, and hummed. Big crayfish, so delicious. Meow, ugly duckling meowed, and looked at the three of them aggrievedly. Oh, I seem to have forgotten to prepare food for Ugly Duckling. Meg suddenly remembered. As his presence was too low, he forgot about it. Amy reached out to stroke Ugly Duckling's head and consoled it. It's all right. There won't be dinner, either. Meow. Ugly Duckling lay on the ground weakly, as if it was about to collapse from hunger. All right, I'll steam a crayfish for you. Meg grabbed a crayfish and walked towards the kitchen. After lunch, Meg drove the mobile restaurant to the west and arrived at the uninhabited west of Carapace Island in less than half an hour. Let's go and take a look at the island first. Meg, who had already changed, carried Amy, who was disguised as a little demon, onto the island. Chapter 13:13. Carapace Island was covered in grayish-white rocks, and the shape of the entire island resembled a huge shell. Most of the buildings on the island were built with shells, hence the name. This island was located in the center of the Demon Islands. Due to the lack of resources and barren land on the island, and the fact that there would be demonic winds in May and June every year, it was abandoned by all the major demon tribes. However, it gradually became a prosperous island where all kinds of demons gathered. It was similar to Chaos City. You could meet all kinds of demons here. However, compared to Chaos City, which was governed by the Great Temple and the City Lord's Castle, and had set up complete laws, Carapace Island was a lawless place. Killings and robberies were very common here, and the law of the jungle ruled the entire island. In recent years, the 10 major demon tribes had joined forces to set up the 10 Kings Palace on Carapace Island. Those who did business on the island would be protected by the 10 Kings Palace as long as they paid a certain fee to the 10 Kings Palace on time. They would be safe to a certain extent. However, other than that, chaos was still the main theme of this island. This was all the information that Meg obtained from his memories. Right now, he had already pasted on a beard, a pair of demon horns, and 2 pincer tattoos on his face. He was disguised as a Baltan demon. That's right, he was the crayfish of the valiant bravery. Meanwhile, Amy wore 2 black pincers on her head. She made them herself from the crayfish she caught in the morning. She drew a pair of small feelers on her mouth and put on an orange-red coat. She looked like a crayfish. She was a little Baltan demon. Irina changed her white dress into a black dress. Her long silver hair that reached her calves was hidden in her clothes, and she changed it into a light golden shoulder-length hair that was slightly curly. She used magic to adjust her face, and her blue eyes became red. They were as clear as pomegranate seeds. She was still beautiful, but her appearance had changed. She was disguised as a nightmare. The Baltan demons were once an upper-middle race among the demon race. However, in the racial war 100 years ago, the Baltan demons were almost completely wiped out. After the war, they were not even given a small island. In recent years, they rarely appeared and were basically extinct. The Dream Demon was a very special existence in the demon race. Perhaps they couldn't be considered a separate race because the Dream Demon could awaken from any demon race. At the same time, there wouldn't be more than 10 Dream Demons in the world. Therefore, this was also considered a mysterious inheritance. Only when a Dream Demon died would a new one appear. It was said that Dream Demons could see the future, and there were also some who said that Dream Demons would bring about disasters. However, none of these had been proven, which only made Dream Demons even more mysterious. This identity allowed Meg and the others to stay on Carapace Island without attracting too much attention and open a lobster restaurant. Father, will there be demons who want to roast and eat me in my current state? Amy asked worriedly as she waved her pincers. Such fresh and tender crayfish must taste really good. They will think so, Irina said with a smile. Wow, that's so scary. Amy hugged Meg's arm, and looked at Irina resentfully. Your mother lied to you. If anyone wants to eat Amy, they will have to ask my kitchen knife first, Meg said with a smile as he patted Amy's head. Father is the best. Amy nodded and snorted at Irina. Mother is naughty. I'm naughty? If you meet a demon that your father can't defeat and wants to eat you, who do you think can save Amy? Irina asked with a smile. Mother is the best. Father is super nice too. Amy quickly grabbed Irina's hand with her other hand. Meg stopped and looked at Amy seriously as he said, All right, the harbor is right in front of us. Amy, from now on, we're going to experience life as demons. You have to remember that you're a little Bartan demon named Xiao AI. Do you understand? I know. I'm a little demon. My name is Xiao AI. Amy nodded and looked in the direction of the harbor eagerly. She couldn't wait to find a little demon to introduce her new name to. All right, let's go then. Meg knew how smart Amy was, so he didn't need to remind her. He held her little hand and continued walking forward. Ghost-faced fish. Ghost-faced fish that was just caught from the sea. 50 copper coins for 500 grams. Quick, come and take a look. Deep-sea snake eel is the last one. It will be gone if you miss it. Come and snatch it. Fresh sea fish. They were all just caught. I bought them at a cheap price. As soon as they got close to the harbor, the clamor of hawking immediately hit them in the face, giving Meg the illusion that he was in a market. The demon fishermen were hawking the seafood that had just been caught today. The variety of fresh sea fish was too much for the eyes to take in. For example, the ghost-faced fish with a black ghost face was still spitting out big bubbles when it was pulled out of the water. The deep-sea snake eel that was more than 2 meters long bit off a large piece of the edge of a wooden barrel. It looked very ferocious. Meg's group of 3 appeared at the harbor and immediately attracted a lot of attention. It was mainly because Irina was too beautiful. Even though she had changed her appearance, she was still beautiful and moving. Amy was too cute. Of course, the most important thing was that Meg was too ordinary and didn't look very strong. Meg and Irina didn't care about those gazes. It was human nature to be envious, and they were already used to it. If they wanted to kill someone just by looking at them, how could they kill all of them? Meg sized up the seafood that the fishermen were selling unhurriedly and asked about the price occasionally. It was also considered an investigation of the ingredients. After the 10 Kings Palace's reforms over the years, there were fewer disputes during the day on Carapace Island. Although demons were naturally violent, most of them cherished their lives. There were so many demon races, and no one knew if the other party had any hidden tricks. Therefore, no one took the initiative to look for trouble. It's a little boring. Irina pursed her lips. Surprisingly, no one came to look for trouble. This was a little different from Carapace Island a few years ago. No one came to look for trouble, and it really made one's hands itch. Amy, who was walking beside Meg, suddenly pointed at a big basin not far away and said, Father, look, that big prawn. Meg looked in the direction that Amy was pointing at, and his eyes lit up. Weren't the 2 big prawns in that big basin? The system reared. The old fisherman, Tucker, was staring at the 2 big buckets in front of him with a worried expression. As an old Barda demon, he relied on fishing to maintain his and his wife's livelihood. His luck was pretty good today, and he caught quite a lot of fish. He even caught 2 strange-looking prawns. However, it was these 2 prawns that made his arm feel a little numb and completely ruined his harvest today. He only put one of them in the bucket for a while, and all the fish he caught today died. Chapter 13-14. Carapace Island never lacked fishermen. No one wanted dead fish. Even if someone did buy them, the price would be extremely low. As for those 2 strange prawns, 2 customers had just touched them and passed out in front of the stall. When they woke up, they almost tore the stall apart. They probably wouldn't be able to sell them. If it was just for food, these dead fish would be enough for them to eat for 2 days. However, the problem was that the 10 Kings Palace's protective amulet was about to expire today. If they couldn't pay the 500 copper coins, the amulet would be taken back, and they would lose the protection of the 10 Kings Palace. Those vagrants who coveted their huts would chase them out of their houses tonight, or even throw them into the sea. Forget it, old man. No one wants those things. They can't even be touched. Who would want to eat them? I saw dozens of them on the beach this morning, and I didn't even take a second look at them. You still want to sell them for money? These things are everywhere these days, and a few of our peers have already fallen for them. You're really not up to date with the news. You even pick them up like they're treasures." The young fisherman sitting at the side sneered. His fish were almost sold out, and it was another day full of harvest. Tucker sighed deeply. Although the young demon's words weren't nice, they were all reasonable. It seemed like he wouldn't be able to sell them today. He could only go to the beach to try his luck and see if he could catch a few more fish while it was still early. "How much are these prawns?" Tucker was about to get up when a voice sounded. Tucker quickly raised his head and looked at the demon standing in front of the bucket. He had a face full of whiskers and a pair of strange horns on his head. There was a black mark on both sides of his face that looked like a pair of pincers. Tucker couldn't tell what kind of demon he was, but he definitely wouldn't be weaker than a lowly barded demon like him. This demon was holding a small demon's hand. It had a pair of pincers on its head and looked very adorable. Tucker didn't dare to look at the beautiful female demon behind him. He quickly looked at Meg and replied, "If my lord wants them, you could take both of them away for 500 copper coins. I can also give the whole bucket of fish to you." Meg glanced at the dead fish with their white bellies in the wooden bucket and roughly guessed their cause of death. The poison on the shells of these crayfish was too potent. Although these fish are dead, they died not too long ago. They were just caught this afternoon. Tucker hurriedly explained, looking at Meg nervously. This might be his only chance to sell these fish and prawns today. "I don't want dead fish. Isn't 500 copper coins for these 2 prawns a little too expensive?" Meg said with a slight frown. He had just overheard the conversation between the 2 fishermen. He should be the only one on Carapace Island who wanted crayfish now. For the sake of a large-scale promotion later on, the price of a crayfish was a very unwise choice. "Can it be 500? Sweat appeared on Tucker's forehead. He looked a little anxious. He only had a dozen copper coins left. How could it be cheap? There really is a fool who wants this prawn? The young fisherman at the side looked at Mag in surprise. However, his gaze quickly landed on Irina, and he was stunned. He quickly retracted his gaze. As a bottom-tier demon, he knew very well that sometimes taking an extra look would bring about a fatal disaster. "I want these prawns, but the price is too expensive. If it's 50 copper coins for one, I will take both of them." Meg said calmly, "If this prawn was on Earth, it would cost at least 1,000 to 2,000 copper coins. King crabs and the like were nothing compared to it. 50 copper coins." The young devil at the side stared. The devil ray, which was extremely difficult to catch, was only sold for 50 copper coins per kilogram. He saw dozens of these huge prawns when he was gathering at the beach. If he caught all of them and sold them to this fellow, wouldn't he earn a few thousand copper coins today? Tucker was a little tempted when he heard this price. If he wasn't in a hurry to get the 500 copper coins today, he would definitely sell these 2 prawns and go back to the beach to look for more prawns immediately. Plop! Tucker directly knelt in front of Meg and looked at Meg pleadingly. "Sir, if you need these prawns, can you give me 500 copper coins in advance? I will catch 10 more prawns for you in the next few days. Please give me 500 copper coins today. I am in a hurry to renew the amulet. If I don't renew it today, my wife and I won't be able to live." This really shocked Meg. He quickly reached out and pulled Tucker up. After thinking for a while, he nodded and said, "That works too. I will take these 2 prawns first. In the future, I will come to the dock every evening. I will buy as many prawns as you can catch at the price of 50 copper coins per prawn." Thank you, thank you." Tucker was about to kneel again, but Meg reached out and held him up. He quickly reached out to catch the 2 prawns. "Wrap them in a piece of cloth and catch them. This prawn is called crayfish. There is poison on the shell, and it will prick your hand," Meg reminded him. "So this thing is called crayfish. You are really an expert. My hand was pricked, and it is still numb." Tucker looked at Meg with some surprise. He didn't expect him to know that the prawns would prick his hand. After grabbing one with his clothes, he indeed didn't feel numb. He tied the pincers with a rope and then carried the 2 prawns to Meg. Meg took out 5 gold coins from his pocket and handed them to Tucker. He reached out and took the prawns. The transaction between Tucker and Meg attracted the attention of many fishermen. These days, they often saw these prawns on the shore, but no one wanted them and couldn't eat them. They didn't expect someone to buy them at the price of 50 copper coins per prawn. What a spendthrift. Sir, I also know where to catch these prawns. Do you still need them? The young fisherman squatting at the side couldn't help but ask. The fisherman also listened attentively. This was much faster than catching fish. If you can catch these prawns, I will buy as many as you can. The price will still be 50 copper coins per prawn. Meg smiled and nodded. That's great. The young fisherman's eyes lit up. He grabbed the fish basket in front of him and stood up, ready to catch the crayfish now. He had seen a lot today. If he caught them now, he would be able to catch a lot before dark. However, after taking 2 steps, he stopped and looked back at Meg. He asked, "Then how do I give you the crayfish?" "I will come to the dock in the morning and evening. If you catch any crayfish, you can sell them to me," Meg said. "Okay, I will catch a lot of crayfish for you tomorrow morning." The young fisherman turned and trotted in the direction of the beach. Many fishermen also got up and walked quickly in the direction of the beach. They had seen a lot of crayfish today. At 50 copper coins per prawn, they could make a fortune just by catching a few. Moreover, they didn't have to worry about not being able to sell them. They had really met a spendthrift. "Let's go." Meg glanced at the fishermen who were rushing to the beach. He carried the crayfish and walked in the direction of the town. A crayfish supply chain had been established. He didn't have to worry about the ingredients for the time being. 300,000 crayfish. This was an industry worth 15 million copper coins. He believed that these fishermen would do their best to help him catch the crayfish. He only needed to make eating crayfish into a new industry. Foodies of the Demon Islands, welcome your king. Meg carried the prawns and walked out with the aura of a king. Chapter 13:15. Handsome boy, do you want to eat? Handsome boy, do you want to get a haircut? Handsome boy, do you want a back massage? This little sister is very good at it. Walking on the streets of Carapace Island, Meg gradually lost himself in the calls of handsome boy. Looking at the succubi, standing at the doors of the small houses, and welcoming him with warm smiles and sweet voices, it was really respectable to have such a passionate and unrestrained yet serious work attitude. These big sisters are so enthusiastic. They even invited us to their houses to play. Amy looked around curiously and didn't forget to wave at those enthusiastic succubi. Yeah, it's rare to see such enthusiastic big sisters. Shall we go and play? Irenaeus said to Meg with a smile. Sure, but there's no need for that. Meg had a serious expression. He wasn't that stupid if they wanted to trick him. However, this Carapace Island was really special. Walking on the streets made him feel like he was walking on the streets of Guangzhou. It was probably because the calls of handsome boy were too bewitching that he felt like he was floating. Then where are we going now? Amy asked curiously. We're going to buy a piece of land and build a restaurant first, Meg said softly as he looked around. Most of the places on Carapace Island were occupied by shell houses of various sizes. There were hundreds of thousands of demons living on the island, and it could be considered a big island. There was a huge gap between the rich and the poor. The lower-class demons relied on fishing for a living, while the upper-class and middle-class demons exploited the lower-class demons or did some business to maintain their dignity. The lower-class demons lived on the rugged rocks on the outskirts of the island. Every year, when the demon winds blew, many of the lower-class demons would be blown away along with their houses. Near the center of the island, the terrain gradually leveled out, and a decent-sized town rose from the ground. Although the houses were also built with shells and rocks, the scale and style were completely different from the nests on the rocks that could only accommodate 1 or 2 demons. Tall buildings and shops could be seen everywhere, and all kinds of demons were in all kinds of shops. It was very lively. Meg also noticed that there was a wooden plaque hanging at the entrance of each shop with the words 10 Kings Palace engraved on it. It was similar to the wooden plaque hanging from the old fisherman's waist, except that it was more exquisite and larger. Will we also have a seashell restaurant? Amy's eyes lit up with anticipation. If Amy likes it, then we could build a shell restaurant. Meg nodded with a smile. It was naturally best if the style could be integrated into Carapace Island. Along the way, Meg did not see any shops listed for sale. Here, he had to start all over again. The first thing he had to do was to obtain a piece of land so that he could summon the mobile restaurant and build a new restaurant. There seems to be someone selling land over there. Irina pointed at a closed shop at the far corner of the street. Sell the land. Meg looked at the two big words above the shop and was a little surprised by the honesty of this demon when it came to doing business. However, since there was a channel that specialized in selling land, it saved him the trouble of looking for a shop. Mag walked to the front of the shop and knocked on the wooden door. After a long while, a tall demon with a bull's head came out. He yawned and shouted impatiently, "What do you want?" "We want to buy a piece of land," Meg said calmly. This Minotaur demon was only a 5th-tier demon. He could beat 10 of them with one punch. "Come in." The Minotaur demon sized up Meg. He could not tell which race he belonged to, nor could he tell his strength. However, he could vaguely feel that Meg was not weaker than himself. His attitude softened a little as he turned and walked in. Meg and the others entered the shop. The shop was not big. There was only one table and 3 chairs. One of the chairs even had a lame leg. The lighting was very dim, and the air was filled with the smell of cow urine. There were more than 10 wooden signs hanging on the wall, each with a bunch of keys hanging under it. "It stinks." Amy walked to the door, pinched her nose, and turned to leave, refusing to enter the shop again. Irina also stopped at the door and closed it. The Minotaur demon walked to the wooden signs and casually flipped through a few of them. He looked back at Meg and said, "What kind of land do you want to buy? The center of the island or the periphery of the island? Are you going to use it for living or for business?" "I plan to open a restaurant. It doesn't have to be in the center of the island, but it has to be bigger." Meg thought for a while and said, "What a troublesome request." The Minotaur demon turned around and flipped through the wooden signs again. After a while, he took a wooden sign from the corner and threw it at Meg. He said, "This land, 150,000 copper coins. Full payment." Meg looked at the address and approximate area written on the wooden sign and said to the Minotaur demon, "Aren't you going to show us the place first?" "Show us? Heh, there's no such service. Buy it or not." The Minotaur demon looked impatient. "If you don't want to buy, then leave. I still want to sleep." Meg flipped the wooden sign in his hand. The wooden sign recorded the general information of the house. There were 6 rooms and a garden. The area should not be small. "Deal." Mag took out a money pouch and poured it out on the table. The gold and dragon coins fell onto the table, making a crisp sound. "Count them." The Minotaur demon's eyes lit up. He squatted in front of the table and counted the money. 150 dragon coins were quickly counted. "Tell me your name. I'll register it, and that land will belong to you." The Minotaur demon put away the dragon coins and took out a thick booklet from under the table as he spoke to Meg. "Hades," Meg replied. The Minotaur demon used his crooked handwriting to write the name Hades on the booklet. Then, he wrote down a serial number and took out a stamp from a drawer. He pressed a heart on the name and nodded at Meg. "Mr. Hades, that wooden sign is the proof that you own this house. The transaction is complete. You can go and take a look at your new house now." "All right." Meg nodded slightly. This process was easier than he thought. He put away the wooden sign and prepared to leave. "Oh yes, if you've just arrived at Carapace Island, I suggest you go to the 10 Kings Palace to buy a protective amulet. Without a protective amulet, life on Carapace Island will be very difficult," the Minotaur reminded Mag as he kept the booklet. "Thank you." Meg nodded slightly, pushed open the wooden door, and walked out. He took a breath of the fresh air outside and waved the sign in his hand at Irina and Amy. He smiled and said, "Let's go. We'll go to the 10 Kings Palace to buy a protective sign. Then we can go to our new house." 10 Kings Palace? Shouldn't those fellows protect themselves first? Irina looked at Meg and frowned slightly. Chapter 13:16. Letting the demons from the 10 Kings Palace protect Alex and Irina was indeed putting them in a difficult position. After all, the demons from the 10 Kings Palace didn't even dare to step out when the 2 of them were wreaking havoc on this island back then. We're experiencing life now. After all, it's better to keep a low profile. Meg smiled. The 10 great demon tribes didn't station any 10th-tier powerhouses on this island. At most, there were 2 or 3 9th-tier demons on duty. Irina alone could wipe them out 100 times. "All right," Irina nodded. Pretending to be weak was such a boring thing to do. The Ten Kings Palace was located at the center of Carapace Island. It occupied a large area and built 10 palaces of different styles to display the might and prestige of the 10 great demon tribes. There were quite a number of demons applying for protective amulets. There were 6 long lines in front of the palace. Meg observed for a while and chose the line that moved the fastest. The beautiful Irina and the adorable Amy quickly attracted the attention of many demons. Such beautiful female demons were extremely rare on Carapace Island. Those coquettish succubi couldn't even compare to 1% of her beauty. That little demon was also very adorable. As for Meg, he had a full beard, and his physique was very small and skinny among demons. He didn't look like he was from a powerful demon tribe, so he was directly ignored. "Hey, pretty girl, have a drink with your big brother later." A 2-meter-tall, iron-armored demon with bulging muscles and a layer of steel-like carapace standing in the next line chuckled as he looked at Irina. His hand even reached for Irina, wanting to embrace her. All the demons watched this scene excitedly. Many of them were even eager to try. Wasn't this the most exciting and interesting thing on Carapace Island? Useless male demons couldn't protect beautiful female demons. A cold glint flashed across Irina's eyes. Smack! Right at this moment, a pair of hands grabbed the iron-armored demon's wrist. The armored demon looked at Meg, who was grabbing his wrist in surprise. This short and thin demon dared to resist him. Moreover, his strength was not small. He was actually able to grab his hand. "Why are you wearing Pinru's clothes?" Meg frowned as he looked at the level 6 mutated magical beast. "I don't know what you're talking about, but since you don't have a protective amulet, I don't mind killing you. From today onwards, your wife and daughter are mine." The armored demon grinned. His other hand was already clenched into a fist, ready to punch this guy's head. The eyes of the surrounding demons lit up. If that was the case, they might have a chance to get a piece of the pie. "If that's the case, it won't be a problem for me to beat you to death." Meg was deep in thought. This was really a good rule. "Haha, kill me? You will never have such a chance." The armored demon laughed maniacally as he threw a punch at Meg. "Pah!" The iron fist that was the size of a sandbag was caught by a much smaller lobster pincer. The armored demon was stunned as he looked at the lobster pincer and Meg in disbelief. His punch was actually caught. The other demons were also slightly shocked. A level 6 iron-armored demon was already considered a powerhouse on Carapace Island. They didn't expect this ordinary-looking demon to be able to take his punch. "You have to be more respectful to women, especially my woman," Meg said seriously to the armored demon. A bang! A pincer was stuffed into the armored demon's mouth just as he opened it. The punch sent him flying 100 meters away, and he landed on the ground with a loud crash. His armor shattered into pieces, and he didn't even have the chance to twitch. SSS. All the demons gasped as they looked at Meg in a different light. He killed a level 6 demon with one punch. This was a ruthless demon, and his strength was so terrifying. Why bother? Meg put away the pincer that he had custom-made from the system and sighed softly. He only wanted to be protected by the demons in a low-profile manner, but his strength didn't allow him to do so. Meg's gaze swept across the surrounding demons, and they all looked away or lowered their heads. They also carefully hid the little thoughts that they had previously. They could only live longer if they followed their hearts. This was the rule of survival for demons. Oomph. Irina snorted softly. If Meg hadn't made the first move, she would have used the holy light to clean up all these dregs. As for the Ten Kings Palace, she didn't mind tearing it down again if that shabby house was built again. A demon was killed in front of the Ten Kings Palace, but it didn't cause too much of a commotion. Only 2 demons with the Ten Kings Palace badge came out from the Ten Kings Palace. After checking the armored demon's body and confirming that there was no protective amulet, they casually asked 2 demons to dispose of the broken body. That armor was a decent material that could be sold for money after being disposed of. Therefore, many demons were willing to do this. Looking at this scene, Meg had a clearer understanding of the cruelty of Carapace Island. After such a small commotion, no demons dared to find trouble with Meg and the others anymore. Because it was a protective amulet for a shop, it was 10 times more expensive than a normal protective amulet. It was 5,000 copper coins a month. This is really a good business. Meg weighed the protective amulet in his hand. Just the protection provided by the Ten Kings Palace was able to earn a lot of money from Carapace Island every year. Chase them away. We could do this business too. Irina was eager to give it a try. Compared to opening a restaurant, she was more interested in this way of earning money. Keep a low profile. Keep a low profile. Meg helplessly pulled Irina away from the vicinity of the Ten Kings Palace. Meg was also a little helpless against her desire to create big trouble. After asking the demons for directions, Meg quickly found the house that he had just bought today. The house was located in the northwest of Carapace Island. If the center of the island was the first ring and the periphery of the island was the fifth ring, then his house should be around the third ring. It faced a street that wasn't too bustling. There were a few shops scattered around, and there were very few pedestrians. However, just like what the Minotaur demon had said, this house was big enough. It took up about 300 square meters, and it was a 2-story shell house with a small garden in front. It met his requirements. However, the house looked very old and dilapidated. The yard was also overgrown with weeds, and it looked like it had been abandoned for a long time. Although it's a shell house, are we really going to stay here tonight? I see a lot of bugs, Amy said worriedly as she tiptoed to look into the house. It's all right. Father will turn it into a new house, Meg said with a smile. He looked around and saw that there was no one in the neighbor's house, so he clicked to summon the mobile restaurant. Chapter 13:17. When some things were difficult to explain, choosing to remain mysterious was a very wise choice. Therefore, Meg covered Irina's eyes and made Amy obediently close her eyes while counting down from 10. 10, 9, 8. As Amy's tender voice rang out, the mobile restaurant descended from the sky, accompanied by a series of soft noises and slight tremors on the ground. The original house was pressed into the ground and became a stable foundation. Meg let go of the hand covering Irina's eyes and said with a smile, "All right, let's take a look at our new house." Irina and Amy opened their eyes at the same time. Their eyes lit up when they saw the big house that was completely covered in white and silver seashells. "Wow, what a beautiful house. It's really all seashells," Amy exclaimed in surprise. The original rundown house had disappeared and was replaced by a brand new house. Although Irina was already used to Meg's various strange abilities, she was still pleasantly surprised when she saw this beautiful seashells house. The first floor of the 2-story house still seemed to be the restaurant. Through the open door, they could see the neatly arranged tables and chairs inside. There was also a large empty space in front of the house that was surrounded by wooden railings. The ground was covered with seashells and round stones, and there were more than 20 tables scattered around. There was an empty space in the middle of the empty space, and it was unknown what it was used for. "Let's go in and take a look at our new house." Meg held Amy's hand, pushed open the small door, and walked in. In order to be as low-key as possible, Meg chose a more ordinary Carapace Island style when he chose the decoration style. It was very common white seashells with some light gold and light silver seashells in between. It was just that the system had arranged them in a very delicate way, making the overall style look very comfortable. The interior of the restaurant was also more spacious. There were fewer partitions, and black stone tables and chairs were arranged neatly in the style of a food stall. The layout of the kitchen was also very simple. The most conspicuous thing was the 3 large iron pots with a diameter of 2 meters in the middle of the dining room. They took up most of the space in the kitchen, but there was also a set of normal kitchenware and stove. As a single lobster was too big, and in order to complete the mission of catching 300,000 crayfish as soon as possible, Meg had to increase the amount of food he cooked every day. A normal-sized pot could no longer satisfy his needs. However, Meg had no idea how to use the 2-meter wok. He could foresee that there would be a tough battle tonight in the test field for the god of cooking. There was a large fish tank in the corner. There were already dozens of crayfish inside. Meg had caught them from the system's farm in the morning. He casually threw the 2 crayfish he had just bought into the fish tank. Ugly Duckling squatted in front of the fish tank and looked at the crayfish warily. It reached out its chubby little paw and knocked on the fish tank tentatively before quickly retracting its paw. It seemed to have been traumatized by being knocked unconscious in the morning. Wow, this new home is so nice. AI me said happily as she ran around the restaurant and fiddled with the seashell wind chime hanging at the door. She listened to the crisp sound of the wind chime and said happily, "You've been busy the whole morning. Why don't you go upstairs and take a nap?" Meg said as he came out of the kitchen and looked at Amy, who was starting to get sleepy after playing with the wind chimes for a while, and Irina, who looked tired. Irina nodded slightly. "Father, I want a hug." Amy, who was sitting at the door of the dining room, raised her 2 little hands, squinted her eyes, and pouted. "Okay, Father will carry you upstairs to take a nap." Meg walked over with a smile and bent down to carry Amy up gently. Hee, Father is so nice." Amy opened her eyes and kissed Meg's cheek. "I want one too." Irina moved her face closer. "Okay." Amy pouted her little mouth and kissed Irina's cheek too. A smile appeared on Irina's face. "Let's go," Meg said with a smile as he carried Amy up the stairs at the side of the kitchen. The stairs were also covered with seashells, but they were made of more luxurious queen shells, which had a more delicate and soft luster. The overall style was more pinkish-white, and it looked fresh and princess-like. Meanwhile, the floor of the second floor had an overall marine color scheme. He didn't know what technology the system used, but the floor looked like real, flowing seawater, and he could even see seaweed and undersea plants, making him feel as if he was in an ocean world. "It's the sea." Amy took the initiative to jump down from Meg's arms. She stepped on the floor barefoot, rushed forward a few steps, and threw herself onto the floor, sliding across the floor like a fish. Ugly Duckling, who had followed them upstairs, immediately jumped onto Meg's feet and hugged Meg's thigh with its chubby little paws. It lowered its head and looked at the floor, trembling a little. "When did you prepare all these things?" Irina asked Meg with a smile. "When you were asleep," Meg said with a smile. Looking at her, she seemed to be quite satisfied with this house. "Your mouth is getting sweeter and sweeter. Have you said the same thing to other women?" Irina's gaze became a little more scrutinizing. Meg smiled and asked in return, "Apart from you, who would dare to accept it?" "That's true. The little bitches who dare to accept it are all dead." Irina looked at her own hand, and her slender fingers slowly clenched into a delicate fist. She looked at Meg with a smile and said, "Right?" "Yes." Meg nodded in agreement. If this fist landed, everyone would die, including him. There were 3 rooms on the second floor. Amy and Irina shared one room. Meg had his own room and a small study. Irina brought Amy to sleep. Ugly Duckling, whose status in the family had deteriorated, had lost the right to sleep on the bed. It could only lie on the cushion at the end of the bed and call out to Meg, who was at the door, resentfully. Meg looked at it sympathetically. What could he do? He didn't even have the right to sleep in this room now. "Mr. Mac, isn't this too much?" He didn't even write down the return time for this trip. Harrison looked at the notice hanging at the door of the restaurant and sighed. "Mr. Mac, you're such a heartless man. Without tofu pudding, how am I going to maintain my youth and beauty? How am I going to keep those men's hearts?" A gorgeously dressed succubus wiped the corners of her eyes with a silk handkerchief, and her expression was full of resentment. "My hair is only half grown out, and Mr. Mac left just like that. What am I going to do?" Chris, the boss of Broad Employment Agency, touched his hair, which had already grown into a ringed island, and looked worried. "Be satisfied. At least we can still eat lean pork and century egg porridge, beef kebabs, and hot pot." At the door of Mamie's, the customers who came at noon and couldn't even enter the restaurant because of Meg's departure were complaining. "Boss, Mr. Mac is out. What should we do?" Keel said to Sargeras. The demons of the Burning Legion, which had already expanded to more than 60 people, all looked at Sargeras. Mr. Mac's absence meant that they wouldn't be able to eat the holy Ruggiamo. A saint like Mr. Mac needs to go out occasionally to seek inspiration. "We have to be considerate of him," Sargeras said with a serious expression. "However, He also couldn't hide the disappointment in his eyes. After thinking for a while, he said, "Let's take this opportunity to go back to the Demon Islands. We received news from our tribe yesterday that some ignorant bastards came looking for our tribe. We should let them know that we lava demons are not to be trifled with." Bookhouse Reading Website. Chapter 13:18. Since when did this house become so new? And there are so many dining tables? Ivan, the rock troll, who had just returned from quarrying rocks, stared at the brand new house next door and the tables and chairs in the courtyard with a look of astonishment. Maybe we have a new neighbor. This house has been abandoned for a long time. I wonder who moved in. Ivan's wife, Gamina, was also looking at the courtyard with a huge sea turtle in her hand. Forget it. Anyway, we don't have the tradition of greeting our neighbors on this island. If it's a neighbor with a bad personality, he might even get us into trouble. Ivan shook his head and strode towards his own courtyard. That's true. Gamina nodded and followed Ivan into the house. Hearing the sound of the door opening, a little rock troll ran out of the house recklessly. His clumsy rock legs didn't manage to cross the threshold, and he fell to the ground with a thud, creating a hole in the ground. He got up unscathed and looked at the huge sea turtle in Gamina's hand with disappointment. It's a huge sea turtle again. It's a huge sea turtle every day. We're going to become a huge sea turtle from eating so much. Ivan reached out to stroke that little demon's head and said, "Justin, Father will buy you other delicious food tomorrow. Let's eat the sea turtle today first. The sea turtle that your mother makes is delicious. One huge sea turtle is enough for us to eat for a day." That's what you said yesterday and the day before yesterday, but we still eat turtles every day, and it's always turtle stew for the entire day. I might as well eat rocks. Justin snorted and grumbled. Ivan's expression froze, and guilt flashed across his eyes. He glanced at Gamina and stammered, not knowing how to answer. Gamina only knew how to make sea turtle stew. What could he do? He was in despair, too. "Why, Justin? Do you think the sea turtle that I make isn't delicious?" Gamina's expression turned cold, and she stared at Justin with her brownish-green eyes. Justin, who was initially aggressive, cowered instantly. He avoided her gaze and meekly said, "And no, Mother. I just think that we can change to something else to eat or go out for a meal." Eat something else? Go out for a meal? Was there anything more delicious than turtle stew in this world? Is there anyone with better culinary skills than me? Gamina had a ridiculous expression as she turned to look at Ivan. "Tell me, is there?" Ivan felt the stare of death. Even if his conscience hurt, he still shook his head firmly and said, "No. Father, you traitor." Justin looked at Ivan with some disdain. He was the one who suggested that Ivan do this yesterday, but when it came to it, Ivan actually backed down. "Did you see that? Even your knowledgeable father said no." A smug smile appeared on Gamina's face. She placed the giant turtle in her hands on the ground and commanded, "Go, take out the big pot. I'm going to show my true culinary skills and stew a pot of delicious turtle for you." Ivan and Justin, who had failed in their resistance, could only helplessly walk into the house. Soon, they came out with a large pot. There was a simple stove built with 3 large rocks in the middle of the yard. "Let's have grilled fish and grilled prawns tonight." Right at this moment, a voice came from the yard next door. Meg walked out with a grill and placed it on the empty space in the middle of the yard as he spoke to Irina and Amy, who were carrying the ingredients. "I want to eat meat, grilled meat, grilled meat," Amy said as she raised her little hand. Meow, ugly duckling, who was squatting by Amy's feet, raised its little paw in agreement. "All right, then I'll go and prepare some beef kebabs later." Meg nodded with a smile. The theme of tonight's dinner was an outdoor barbecue. This made him feel a little regretful that he didn't choose a house by the sea. After all, it would definitely be more comfortable to have a barbecue facing the sea. "It's the new neighbors?" Hearing the sound from the yard next door, the family of rock trolls who were busy lighting the fire all stood up and looked towards the yard next door curiously. Ivan and Gamina were over 3 meters tall. Even the little fellow, Justin, was 1.5 meters tall. The railing that was over 1 meter tall couldn't block their vision at all. A young, strange demon, a beautiful female demon, and a cute and petite little demon. This family of 3 should be the new neighbors who had just moved in today. However, Ivan and Justin's eyes were completely attracted by the big prawns and big fish on the table at the side. The fish and prawns that were marinated with seasoning gave off the fragrance of spices even before they were cooked. This was a fatal temptation to families who only had salt as their daily condiment. Meg also noticed the 3 rock trolls standing in the yard next door. He smiled and said, "Hello, we just moved in today." "Hello, I'm Gamina. This is Ivan, and this is our child, Justin," Gamina replied. She also introduced her family at the same time. This new neighbor seemed to be quite easy to get along with. "I'm Hades. This is my wife, Irina, and this is our child, Amy." Meg also introduced himself with a smile. The first step of integrating into Carapace Island was to establish a friendly relationship with the neighbors. "Hello, everyone." Amy waved her little hand at everyone. "So cute." Ivan's and Gamina's eyes lit up. They looked at Justin again, and the 2 of them looked at each other as if they had reached some kind of consensus. It seemed like they had to make another daughter. After greeting each other, the rock trolls continued to cook and didn't interact much with Meg and the rest. On Carapace Island, demons wouldn't casually trust any other demons other than their family members. "Mother, I saw that their plates are filled with big fish and prawns." "They look delicious," Justin said after swallowing his saliva. Ivan was secretly observing their expressions at the side. Gamina smiled with disdain and said, "Humph, what's so good about those things? They only have a fishy smell when they're stewed. Only the sea turtle is the most delicious. They'll definitely be envious when I'm done stewing the soup later." Justin and Ivan looked at each other. "We don't know if our neighbor's fish and prawns will be better than the sea turtle stew. We don't dare to say, and we don't dare to ask." After washing the sea turtle, Gamina threw it into a pot of clear water, sprinkled a handful of natural sea salt, and covered the pot with a lid. Then, she clapped her hands with a relaxed expression. Now they just had to wait for the delicacy to come out of the pot. Among the rock trolls, only a smart and virtuous female demon like her could master such a perfect and complicated method of stewing turtles. Many of their clansmen were still eating rocks. Meanwhile, Meg next door had also finished burning the fruit charcoal with Amy's help. He applied a layer of oil to the barbecue rack and then placed the marinated fish on the rack. Sizzle. With a beautiful sound, the skin of the fish sizzled with oil. The aroma of the fish meat and the fragrance of the spices started to spread gradually and floated to the yard next door. Chapter 13:19. Gulp. 3 gulping sounds sounded almost at the same time. This is too fragrant, isn't it?" Ivan, who was sitting in front of the stove, couldn't help but look into the courtyard next door. This was an aroma he had never smelled before. It was his first time knowing that food could give off such a wonderful aroma. It was countless times more delicious than the fragrant soil in the backyard. "Smells so good. It really smells so good." Justin had already climbed up from the ground and was holding onto the railing as he looked into the courtyard next door. That male demon was flipping the big fish on the grill. He had a brush in his hand and was brushing something onto the fish. After a while, he took a small jar and sprinkled some powdery substance onto the fish. It was as if he had injected a soul into it, and the aroma of the fish was instantly stimulated. "Wah!" Justin cried on the spot. He hugged the railing and turned to Gamina as he cried, "Mother, I want to eat that too." Meg, who put down the cumin powder jar, turned around in surprise. He didn't expect the kid next door to really cry because of his craving. Wow, the little brother next door is craving for it. But this grilled fish is ours. Amy sat on a chair at the side and declared her ownership with a serious expression. Meow. Ugly duckling meowed to show its agreement. What are you thinking about? Don't you feel embarrassed? Gamina smashed her fist on Justin's head and directly hammered half of his head into the ground, just enough to retract his face. So cruel. Amy shrank her head and glanced at Meg and Irina. It seemed like father and mother were really super nice to her. Sorry, my child gets hungry very quickly. Once he's hungry, he'll want to eat everything, even soil. His favorite dish is the turtle stew I made. Gamina smiled at Meg and the others, and then glanced at Ivan, who was staring at the grilled fish and swallowing his saliva. Yes, yes, yes. Our whole family loves to eat turtle stew the most. Ivan shuddered and nodded hurriedly. It's all right. He's a child, after all. It's all the same. Meg nodded. He was amazed by his neighbor's cruel parenting style. As for whether the child really liked to eat turtle stew, he didn't know. Who said that? I hate turtle stew the most. Justin, who was squatting in the corner with his head in his hands, mumbled. His head was fine, but his heart had suffered a heavy blow. While crying, he couldn't help but look at the yard on the other side through the gap in the railing. In this world, there was indeed more delicious food than turtle stew. Could that male demon be the legendary gourmet? How could he make such fragrant food? Meg took a plate and grilled the fish over charcoal. He sprinkled some chopped green onions on it, and the aroma of the fish immediately filled the air. It was refreshing. Come, let's eat grilled fish first. Meg placed the grilled fish in front of Amy and Irina, and then changed the grilling plate. He brushed some oil on it, and placed the big lobsters with a cut on their backs on the grill. The pincers were still moving slightly, but the sauce had already seeped in perfectly, ensuring the meat quality and a wonderful taste at the same time. Under the grilling of the charcoal fire, the dark green shell of the lobster gradually turned red. The fat in the shell of the lobster started to sizzle, and the fresh taste that belonged to the lobster blossomed. Meg used the strategy of reducing the oil when grilling the lobsters. The plump lobster meat contained a lot of water, and as the water evaporated, a gap appeared between the meat and the shell. The sauce that was marinated previously had already been perfectly absorbed into the meat, and the aroma filled the air. This is too tempting. I really want to eat it. Justin stood up again at some point and hugged the pillar in the corner. He choked with sobs, and his eyes were full of yearning. Oh, it's so delicious. Amy picked up a piece of fish and blew on it before putting it into her mouth. She then shook her head with elation. Irina also picked up a piece of fish and put it into her mouth. It was a little different from the spicy grilled fish she had at the restaurant. This grilled fish was a little simpler, and there were no side dishes. The crispy fish skin wrapped around the tender flesh of the fish, and a crispy flavor blossomed in her mouth. The tender flesh of the fish was a wonderful surprise. The unique aroma of the fruit charcoal grilled fish gave it a special temperament. Compared to the spicy grilled fish, the cumin aroma of this grilled fish was a little more prominent. However, it didn't overpower the aroma of the fish itself, and it still achieved a perfect balance. It's a little different from the grilled fish from before, but it's still very delicious. Irina picked up another piece of grilled fish. Freshly grilled fish was undoubtedly the most delicious. That's too much. She's actually enjoying it so much. Justin's tears began to flow uncontrollably again. This was the life he yearned for. Don't cry, don't cry. Isn't the turtle stew going to be ready soon? I know you want to eat the turtle stew. Just wait a little longer. Do you have to cry so sadly? Gamina pulled Justin back and pressed him against the stove as she consoled him. Why can't I tell the truth? Justin pouted with grievance. When did he say he liked to eat turtle stew? Hold it in. Gamina glared at him. This concerned the dignity and status of a housewife. She definitely couldn't let anyone threaten or shake her position in this family. Moreover, she still insisted that the turtle stew she made was the most delicious food in the world. What kind of delicious food could a clumsy male demon make? Father, Justin looked at Ivan. Look at this bowl. It's big and round, Ivan said with a silly smile as he picked up a big bowl of freestyle. Justin sighed. Forget it. He had never been able to count on his father. Try the grilled crayfish for the first time today. Meg placed 3 freshly grilled crayfish on the table. The aroma of the grilled crayfish wafted over along with the heat. Irina and Amy, who were immersed in the deliciousness of the grilled fish, couldn't help but raise their heads. It smells so good. Amy's eyes lit up as she looked at the grilled crayfish that Meg placed in front of her. She reached out to grab the big red pincers. The pincers are still very hot now. Let's eat the body of the crayfish first. Meg hurriedly stopped her. He used the table knife to gently cut the crayfish shell on both sides, and the shrunken crayfish meat was easily picked up by Meg with a fork. Even though the meat had shrunk, it was still as thick as Amy's wrist. Wow, what a big piece of meat. Amy's eyes lit up. She took the fork with both hands and blew on it before taking a big bite. "That's delicious," Amy mumbled as she breathed out hot air. Her little face was filled with a blissful smile. At this moment, Gamina's turtle stew was also done. She got up and scooped up some of the smell with her hands to sniff it before removing the lid. A whole giant turtle was floating on the thick white soup. The hot air together with a hint of fishy smell wafted over. Chapter 13:20. Really? Justin, who was already holding a big bowl of turtle stew for the night, jumped up immediately. He looked at the roasted red prawn in Meg's hand in surprise. The wonderful aroma wafted over at such a close distance and made him so touched that he wanted to cry. Ivan's eyes lit up too. However, after taking a look at Gamina, he suppressed the urge to get up, but his gaze was fixed on the crayfish. Is this fellow here to cause trouble? Gamina looked at Meg. His act of delivering food was obviously a challenge to her position in this family. Moreover, he was using the method she was most proud of, cooking. "Oh, I see. Thank you so much. My child is just a glutton." Gamina took the crayfish from Meg with a smile and continued, "My turtle stew is also just done. Don't be in a hurry to go back. I'll get a bowl for each of you." Meg took a look at the giant turtle with its belly facing the sky, floating in the pot of soup. He couldn't even see any spices, and the scene was extremely tragic. He hurriedly waved his hand with a smile and said, "It's all right. You guys have just started eating. We're almost done." "How can I do that? My turtle stew is the best in the tribe. You guys must try it," Gamina said as she scooped up the giant turtle and was about to tear off its legs. "In that case, please give us a bowl of soup. Tonight's dinner is a little dry." "It would be great if we could drink some soup," Mag quickly said. He could forget about the rough turtle shredding. "I'll get you some soup." Ivan got up and scooped a big bowl of soup for Meg and passed it to Meg. "Thank you. Enjoy your meal." Meg hurriedly returned with a big bowl of soup. "This is—" Irina looked at the big bowl Meg brought back and was a little puzzled. "Passionate neighbors." Meg shrugged. The turtle soup was very fresh and thick, but at the same time, it was accompanied by a fishy smell. It was probably because the blood was not cleaned properly when it was drained, and the appropriate spices were not added to remove the fishy smell. It was a waste of a good pot of soup. However, she had good intentions after all, and Mag could also feel Gamina's confidence and strong desire to challenge him. Hence, he still took 3 small bowls and scooped a small bowl for each of them from the big bowl. "Try it." Meg picked up the spoon and took a sip. The soup was very fresh and strong. Even if only a handful of sea salt was added, the turtle still managed to bring out the layers of the soup. However, the fishy taste was also present. It was not the kind that was hard to swallow, but for Meg, this was obviously not a soup that he would drink a second time. So he put down the spoon. "It's quite good. It's even better when paired with fish meat." Amy ate a mouthful of soup and a piece of grilled fish very happily. Irina only took a whiff and then moved the bowl to the side. She took a bite of the prawn and said, "The cooking skills of the rock trolls are indeed as rumored. However, compared to their traditional famous dish, stone mixed with sand, those who can make it to this standard should already be considered culinary geniuses in their race." "There's such a famous dish?" Meg was speechless. He thought that stargazy pie was already a representative of dark cuisine. Mudslide feast, stone feast, stewed small stones. There are countless representative dishes. It's just that ordinary people are not used to eating them. Irina nodded. What a strong race. Meg was in awe. A race that could play so many tricks on eating dirt must have a place in this world. Their race is almost extinct. Eating rocks causes indigestion and choking to death. The proportion of rock trolls is extremely high. Irina pursed her lips. Meg, on the other side, Justin placed the grilled crayfish on the stone table. After swallowing his saliva countless times, he rubbed his hands and prepared to eat this tempting little fellow. It was his first time seeing food that emitted such a wonderful aroma. Clang! A big bowl of turtle stew was placed in front of him. The turtle that died with its eyes wide open stuck its head out and stared at him. Gamina looked at Justin affectionately and said, "Your loving mother personally made you this delicious turtle stew after a tiring day, or this crayfish that another man casually made. Which do you choose?" Justin's eyes were filled with hot tears. He stretched out his trembling hand and pointed at the crayfish firmly. "I choose him." "Eat shit, you piece of shit." Gamina pressed Justin's head into the table with one hand, and then looked at Ivan with a cold gaze. Ivan quickly picked up the big bowl in front of him and took a bite of the giant turtle's leg. He chewed and swallowed the meat along with the bones and nodded with a silly smile. "This turtle stew is really delicious today. Eat slowly. There's still more in the pot." Gamina finally smiled and tore off another turtle's leg for Ivan. "Honey, you eat too. You've worked hard today." Ivan quickly scooped a bowl of turtle stew for Gamina and tore off a big piece of meat to put in her bowl as he fawned over her. Justin, whose face was a little swollen, propped his hands on the table and pulled his head out of the table again. He looked at Ivan with disdain and then at Gamina carefully. He picked up the big bowl in front of him and finished the soup in a few gulps. Then he chewed and swallowed the turtle's head and a big piece of turtle meat before saying, "Can I eat now?" "Eat. You'll only understand how delicious my turtle stew is after you've eaten something made by others," Gamina said with a relaxed expression and looked very confident. Ivan also put down the bowl in his hand slowly and swallowed his saliva as he looked at the crayfish. "That's great." Justin's eyes lit up. He tore off a big pincer and put it in front of his nose to sniff it. Even the pincer gave off a wonderful fragrance. Crack! His hard teeth crushed the shell instantly. The crispy texture was even more wonderful than the hard stone. What was even more peculiar was that there was actually plump and soft meat inside the crispy shell. The freshness of the meat blossomed instantly, and it was as if countless fireworks were blossoming on his taste buds, making Justin's smile blossom like a flower. "Oh my God, there's actually such delicious food in this world. It's simply unbelievable." Justin already didn't know how to describe this delicacy because he had never tasted food that was close to this delicacy. In his diet, there was only turtle stew every day. Is it really that delicious? You're lying, aren't you? Ivan tore off another pincer with a look of disbelief and then put it in his mouth to crush it. "Wow!" Ivan stood up with a whoosh. The crispy prawn shell was easily crushed by him. The wonderful taste made him unable to control his expression and body. This was completely beyond his imagination. In his mind, a giant turtle was swimming freely. Suddenly, a giant pincer fell from the sky and clamped the giant turtle into two with a crack. Then, a giant red crayfish slowly appeared and occupied the entire sea. Gamina, who was originally full of confidence, froze when she saw the father and son who suddenly fell into a state of bliss. She looked at the big crayfish with suspicion. Is it really that delicious? Or are they acting me? Chapter 13:21. I seem to have seen the beauty of a demon's life in this crayfish, Justin said with his eyes wide open. Then he reached out to break off the crayfish's head and took a bite of the shiny crayfish brain. The fragrant crayfish butter filled his mouth and sent his taste buds into a frenzy again. He didn't even let go of the crayfish shell. Tuck, tuck, tuck. With a series of tremors, a layer of gray rock on the surface of Justin's body fell off and revealed a new grayish-black stone shell. He succeeded in his first evolution. Gamina, who wanted to give Justin a big slap, looked at Justin's new stone shell in astonishment. There was even a tinge of red in the grayish-black stone shell. He really changed his shell. Ivan, who was reaching out his hand, was also stunned. He also looked at Justin in surprise. He was only 10 years old. According to convention, rock demons would only change their shells for the first time when they were 15 years old. Only a few geniuses would change their shells earlier. Changing my shell? Justin didn't quite understand the meaning behind this. He clapped his hands to get rid of the mud powder and reached out for the crayfish again. This crayfish was simply too delicious. It was such a blissful life to be able to eat such delicious food. It would be great if he could continue to be blissful. Could it be related to this crayfish? Gamina and Ivan looked at each other. They were very clear about Justin's talent. Both of them only changed their stone shells for the first time when they were 15 or 16 years old. Their talent was very mediocre, and Justin didn't show any special talent since he was young. He was even clumsier than other children, so he couldn't be a genius. Then, the only explanation was this crayfish that the new neighbor next door gave him. They wouldn't believe that Justin suddenly changed his shell after eating a pincer, and a crayfish skull had nothing to do with it. Mother, you should try it too. This grilled crayfish is really delicious. Justin broke off a piece of the fattest crayfish meat and brought it to Gamina's mouth. The fragrance of the crayfish meat wafted over at close range and brought about endless temptation. Gamina, who wanted to push the crayfish meat away, opened her mouth involuntarily. When the plump crayfish meat entered her mouth, her teeth that could easily crush rocks felt a special springiness. With a gentle bite, the fresh taste blossomed in her mouth. Her clumsy taste buds became unusually active, as if they wanted to taste every single taste and crazily catered to the blossoming of taste. This taste, how can there be such a wonderful taste in this world? Gamina was shocked. The image of the giant sea turtle in her mind was crushed into a thin meat patty by a red lobster. Her body and mind were completely conquered by the crayfish after just one encounter. My sea turtle, the difference is too big, Gamina sighed. Compared to the crayfish, the turtle stew that she was so proud of didn't even deserve to be called food. Honey, give me another bowl of sea turtle soup. Today's soup is really delicious. I think your culinary skills have improved again, Ivan said to the disappointed Gamina as he handed over the big bowl with a chuckle. Gamina looked up at Ivan and saw the smile on his face. She suddenly felt a lump in her throat and jokingly scolded, "Don't you have hands? Do you still need me to scoop it for you?" However, he still scooped up a large bowl of soup for Ivan and added a large turtle leg while he was at it. "How is it, Mother? Isn't this crayfish super delicious?" Justin said to Gamina proudly. He finally proved that he was right. The food cooked by others was indeed better than his mother's. Sea turtle soup was the most disgusting thing in the world. Rascal, sea turtle soup is so delicious. There are so many demons in our tribe who are envious of it. This crayfish can only be a snack. Do you think you can eat it as a meal? Ivan slapped Justin's head and shot him a few glances. His gaze also became a little more stern. Justin's head slammed onto the table. Although it didn't hurt, tears of grievance were already welling up in his eyes. Looking at his parents who were like two mountains, he didn't dare to voice out his anger. He nodded sullenly and said, "Sea turtle soup is really delicious. Eat it. Finish the rest." Gamina reached out to touch Justin's head and passed the remaining half of the crayfish to him. "Can I go on my way after I'm full?" Justin asked fearfully as he held the crayfish. There must be a reason for this abnormality. The contrast in his mother's attitude was too big. "You don't want to eat it, right?" Gamina's face turned cold. "I'll eat it." Justin stuffed the crayfish meat and shell into his mouth and chewed with great relish. Justin finished the crayfish very quickly. He licked his hand as if he hadn't had enough. Unfortunately, there was only one crayfish, and it wasn't enough at all. Gamina grabbed Justin's hand and looked at it seriously for a while. Compared to just now, the red on the grayish-white stone shell had become clearer. It was a little like the red on the crayfish's shell. "It wasn't this hard when I changed my shell for the first time." Ivan also reached out to pinch the slightly protruding stone shell on Justin's back. He suddenly retracted his hand and said in shock, "Why does it feel a little prickly? It's also a little numb." Gamina ignored him and instead asked Justin, "Justin, do you feel anything special after changing your shell?" Justin nodded and said, "What do you feel like?" "Feel?" Justin stood up and clenched his fists. "It seems like my strength has increased. Give a try with a punch." Gamina pointed at the giant rock that was almost as tall as a human standing in the courtyard. That rock was what they used to train Justin. It was filled with holes left by his fists. Justin walked over and took a deep breath. Then he clenched his fist and punched the rock. Crack! With a soft sound, a crack appeared on the giant rock with his fist as the center. The crack expanded rapidly, and the giant rock was split into two before crashing to the ground. How did I become so powerful? Justin looked at the giant rock that he smashed with his fist in disbelief. You have indeed reached the strength of your first shell change, and this layer of stone shell seems to have mutated a little, Ivan said with a smile as he looked at the giant rock. That's great. Our son is going to become a rare genius among the rock trolls, Gamina exclaimed in surprise. Mutated stone shells were extremely rare among the rock trolls. Once it appeared, it would leave its name in the history of the rock trolls. Genius! Justin was taken aback and said with uncertainty, Didn't you guys always say that I'm a rare idiot among the rock trolls? Could Justin's sudden evolution be related to this crayfish? Ivan raised his doubts and speculations again. That's possible. Gamina nodded. If eating turtle soup could help one evolve, then he wouldn't have waited until today to evolve. Justin said with determination, In order to verify your thoughts, I'm willing to eat crayfish every day until I'm full. Chapter 1322. The commotion next door didn't affect Meg and the rest's mood as they ate their barbecue. However, Meg was also amazed by their neighbor's iron rod and fist education method. Luckily, that silly child could take a beating. After being urged a few times, Ivan still asked Meg, who was grilling meat shamelessly, then, Neighbor, are you planning to open a restaurant? Yes, we're preparing to open for business tomorrow, Meg replied with a smile. Then are the grilled crayfish for sale? Ivan asked hesitantly. Meg shook his head and said, I don't think the grilled crayfish is for sale anymore. However, I'm opening a crayfish restaurant, and I'll be releasing crayfish of all flavors tomorrow. If you're interested, you can come and take a look tomorrow. It seemed like this neighbor was already captivated by the grilled crayfish. Perhaps he could even become the restaurant's first customer, which was very important to the restaurant. Oh, I see. All right. Our family will definitely come tomorrow. Ivan nodded before retracting his head. Whether it's really effective or not, we'll know when we try it tomorrow, Ivan said to Gamina. Crayfish of all flavors. Justin had already started to drool. Howl. A howl sounded in the sky above Carapace Island at night. It's here. Meg, who was reading in the study, got up and went to the balcony when he heard the sound. A black shadow circled in the sky and quickly found Meg's aura. It swooped down toward the restaurant, hovered 3 meters above the restaurant, and stuck its head down to rub against Meg's face. Ozzy, you really know the way. Meg patted Ozzy's head with a smile. He told Ozzy that he was going to Carapace Island the night before they set off, but he didn't expect it to really fly here today. Little Ozzy, why are you here? Irina walked out in her pajamas and asked Ozzy with a smile. Ozzy quickly hid behind Meg and frantically tried to please Irina through Meg. Come here, let me touch your head. Irina waved at it. How? Ozzy looked at Meg for help. Meg shrugged his shoulders. What else could he do? Even if Irina wanted to pat his head, he had to obediently stretch his head out. Woo, Ozzy reluctantly put its furry head in front of Irina. It's so soft and warm. Irina reached out her hands and rubbed Ozzy's head, a happy smile on her face. Ozzy, on the other hand, rolled her eyes and looked as if she had nothing to live for. Little Ozzy, I want to rub the dog's head too. I want to rub it too. Amy had also come upstairs at some point. She looked at Ozzy's furry head and said while jumping up and down, Come, let's do it together. Irina lifted Amy up and gently placed her on Z's neck. Amy hugged Ozzy's neck and pressed her face against it. She smiled and said, Little Ozzy is so warm, just like a big stove. Meow, meow. Ugly Duckling looked up at the huge purple-striped griffin with curiosity in its eyes. It looked back at its back and was a little disappointed when it didn't have the same pair of wings. Irina and Amy only let go of Ozzy's head after they were done playing with each other. Ozzy lowered its head and stared at Ugly Duckling. It sniffed it with its nose and then stared at the little wing-like fur on its back for a while. Suddenly, it sneered. Meow. Ugly Duckling felt humiliated and meowed sternly. However, its voice was still a little childish. Ozzy laughed even more happily, revealing 2 rows of sharp, white teeth. Meow, meow, meow. Ugly Duckling shrugged its back and tried to make itself fly. However, apart from its ridiculous posture, its body still stood firmly on the ground. Ugly Duckling, you're too fat. Your wings can't let you fly anymore. Amy squatted down and touched the 2 little wings on Ugly Duckling's back. She smiled and said, When can these wings grow out? I really like to eat wing tips. Ugly Duckling and Ozzy looked at Amy at the same time with fear in their eyes. It's all right. I'm not going to eat you guys yet. Amy consoled them. Ugly Duckling and Ozzy backed off at the same time. This was even scarier. Go and play. Don't go too far and don't get discovered. Come and find us at night. I'll prepare something delicious for you. Meg smiled and patted Ozzy's head. Howl. Ozzy meowed happily and flapped its wings to leave. Ugly Duckling looked up at Ozzy's departing figure with a little envy in its eyes. Let's go. It's time for us to sleep. Meg watched Ozzy leave before bringing Irina and the others downstairs to sleep. Lying on the bed, Meg closed his eyes and calmed himself down very quickly. Then, he pushed open the door to the test field for the god of cookery. Challenge it, crayfish. Host, please complete the mission of cutting the back of 100 crayfish within 10 seconds, and ensure that the crayfish meat is intact and the cut is continuous. Countdown begins. 10, 9, 8. As soon as Meg entered the test field for the god of cookery, the system's voice sounded, followed by crayfish flying all over the sky. Meg, who was still in a daze, didn't even have time to pick up the kitchen knife before the crayfish were already hanging all over his body. There were even 2 crawling on his face and trying to pinch his ears with their big pincers, but he cut off their pincers. Challenge failed. The countdown ended, and the system's voice also sounded. System, what the hell is this? Meg said with a frown as he swept the crayfish off his body. Wasn't this messing with him? Cutting the back of the crayfish is a very important step in the cooking of crayfish. How to cut the back of the crayfish elegantly without harming the meat itself is a perfect example of the perfect combination of artistry and technique. If the host wants to learn how to cook crayfish, he must first master the technique of cutting the back of the crayfish, the system replied. Then you should at least let me practice first. Who can stand to be covered with crayfish the moment I come in? Meg refused. Increasing the speed of cutting the back of the crayfish was something Meg agreed with. This was related to whether he could supply a large amount of crayfish. The second round of the challenge will begin immediately. Host, please get ready. Countdown 10, 9. The system ignored Meg's words, and the second round of crayfish attacked again. Meg immediately raised the kitchen knife, and with his fast, accurate, and ruthless knife skills, he successfully cut the 100 crayfish in half. Challenge failed. The third round of the challenge begins. Challenge failed. Challenge failed. When the tip of the knife cuts across the back of the crayfish, I can feel the position of every joint on the shell. I know what kind of force I should use to cut open the shell. However, this process is less than 0.1 seconds. Ordinary people can't see what I did during this process. All you can see is a crayfish whose shell was perfectly cut open. The cut on the shell is smooth, and the meat is not damaged at all. Of course, you can't imagine how many crayfish died under my knife in order to do all this. Autobiography of the Master Chef. That you're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.